Singularity, Lord of Mysteries Chapter 61-80. Author, Shadow_Magus. Tarot Club 9th Meeting. Meanwhile, back in Pritz Harbor, in a field of abandoned warehouses. Disgusting stench of rotten animal corpses. Check. Warehouses that are abandoned and rusting away by the salty breeze of the sea. Check. A lighthouse not too far away randomly throws light into the warehouses. Check. Random shady thugs bustling about. Check. Now, I will need to find a demisol among the various warehouses. I don't have much time, but going one by one without making much noise is the way to go. Tom was crouching behind a few crates near one of the 5 warehouses in this field of abandoned warehouses, hiding from the light and from the thugs, criminals, and otherwise not so friendly people who were scattered all about the field. Carefully walking on the ground, making sure neither his footsteps nor the rubbing of his clothes made much noise, Tom crawled all the way to the nearest warehouse which had the least number of people around it. He carefully glanced inside only to see nothing since there was no light. He waited for the light from the lighthouse to make its way around and back to this warehouse, and finally got a glimpse, but what he saw shocked him. The entire warehouse was filled with corpses, though not all were corpses. Those that were living would barely qualify as part of the living, with their bodies as thin as skeletons and their breathing as frail as a dying flower. Most of them were women and children, with just a few men among the group, barely distinguishable due to the stubble on their faces. Tom hesitated for a bit, but then carefully backed away from the warehouse, inspecting his surroundings and moving on to the next. He was not here to be some sort of hero for justice and pounce on these clearly disguised slave traders and human traffickers. No, he was here to save a demisol, and that was exactly what he would do. Of course, he would have to keep the information about these people from a demisol, or else he will most likely try and attack the sorry excuses for humans. After 2 warehouses of people, he finally found an empty warehouse and sneaked inside, soon finding the plain-looking iron bracelet. It was rather easy to find considering almost everything else had either a lot of dust, mold, or rust all over it. But a demisol was not in this workhouse. Max had put a hold on his studying as he saw Tom find his bracelet. Now, instead of his vision of Tom being highly restricted, he could see a lot more since he was looking through the bracelet which had the power of the amalgamation of all. He frowned as the current situation was one where he would not be able to do much even if he made his way back to Earth, since the distance between Tingen and Pritz Harbor was immense, and he would not be able to complete it within 10 minutes or so to arrive on time to save either of his 2 subordinates. As such, all he could do was warn Tom about any danger he was about to encounter just before he did. Thankfully, as time moved, Max found that Tom successfully located a demisol along with 3 other captives, all boys the same age as a demisol, in pitiful conditions. A demisol naturally took the lead to bring them out on their great escape and finally took some rest after reaching an inn. Tom made sure not to bring a demisol or the other 3 kids near the warehouses with the rotting corpses and half-alive people. So, do you have any family or friends you can go back to? A demisol asked hesitatingly since he had a feeling what their answer was going to be. The look in their eyes was the same that both he and Tom had before they met the mister. All 3 remained silent, with their heads lowered to the ground. Well, why don't you come with us? We have this mister who takes care of us, he might even take you in. A demisol said, trying to rectify his mistake of asking such a question. Hearing this, all 3 looked up at a demisol with tears in their eyes before bursting into fits of laughter and crying while hugging a demisol. Tom stood by the side silently as he did not know if the mister would actually take in the 3 kids. But since a demisol had already made the decision, he would go with it. Here, Tom threw the bracelet at a demisol, who happily took it and put it on while sighing in relief. You could have given it to me before. He turned to Tom. If we were in real danger, your powers would have likely activated and warned us. Our chances of survival were higher this way, he said while nodding to himself at his well-made plan. No, you fool, my powers do not show immediate danger or anything like that. In fact, it is much worse than that. Sure, let's leave Pritz Harbor first. You prepare a carriage while I'll get us some food for the journey and for our new friends as well. Tom said before turning around and vanishing into the darkness of the inn's corridor. Being a Sequence 9 hunter, Tom's physical prowess and senses were far superior to normal people, which had allowed him to escape the sight of the thugs in the warehouse field successfully, as well as his speed right now of running along the corridor and out into the main lobby of the inn before a demisol could even try and question Tom's plan. Mark smirked as he got another few members for his Beander organization on Earth. Then, he got back to Reading. It should not take me more than another week or so to be able to learn the language. Unlike Klein, who had been going about his daily life, and only spent an hour or so daily to learn new languages, Max was spending all of the day and nighttime, other than the bits where he ate, slept, and communicated with Ademisol and Tom through Unity in the Castle Black, as he renamed it, to learn this language. And it was clearly paying off. Despite not having whatever reincarnation benefits Klein had that allowed him to learn the mysticism languages in just a few weeks, Max had spent a similar amount of time learning a new language that did not involve mysticism in any way. With a reduced difficulty and so much more time per day, it was no wonder that Max was already able to speak and understand the language. Even reading had become easy. It was just writing that was a problem, but that would go away with practice. Then I will have to find another teacher to help me fix my pronunciations. Max thought to himself as he continued reading under the dim sunlight that entered through the breathing hole. August 20, 1349 of the 5th epoch. Klein sealed his room with spirituality just 15 minutes before 3 o'clock, took 4 steps counterclockwise and entered the castle above the gray fog. In the quiet, ancient palace, Klein conjured a piece of goatskin and wrote down a divination statement. I should obtain the clown potion through the Nighthawks. He put his pen down and untangled the spirit pendulum on his wrist, grabbed the pendulum firmly with his left hand, and allowed the topaz to be suspended right above the piece of paper. He recited the statement 7 times. His eyes darkened and the pendulum in his hand started to turn. It turned clockwise. It's a positive answer, so it's appropriate. But it'll be hard to say for the sequences after clown. I should seriously develop my tarot club. Klein did another divination to confirm the answer. After this, he used his hand and pressed down on the dark red star representing the sun. He wanted to bring the youth from the City of Silver in early and ask if he could reveal whatever had happened in this world to the 6-member council. If he hadn't, then Klein would give him a better way of knowing what time the gatherings would start. In a room of the Berg household in the City of Silver, Derek sat silently by the side of his bed, waiting for the fool's summoning. In order to avoid being near anybody, he didn't even go out of the house after he returned. He had nearly finished all the food in his room. Bearing with the hunger and hearing the growls of his stomach, Derek felt as though he was a living corpse roaming around on a dark plain. However, he remained silent, nor did he stand. At that moment, he saw a dark red color spread in the air, quickly swallowing him. The gray, boundless, cold, lonely world appeared in his field of vision once again. Seated at the seat of honor, the fool, who was obscured by the thick fog, presented himself in front of him once more. Klein was satisfied that his summoning wasn't interrupted. He also confirmed that he didn't face any immediate danger. Son, we meet again, he said smilingly, using Jotun. Derek was shocked by what had happened. He lowered his head. You are a fool who keeps his word. The other members will arrive in a while. Before that, I'll confirm a few things with you first. Klein used the Loan language this time but willed the mysterious space to translate it into Jotun. The words rang through the air, coming to Derek in Jotun. He asked curiously, what's the matter? As it turned out, now that he understood Jotun properly, the mysterious space above the gray fog would translate the words spoken here by Derek into something he and the other members could understand. I'll permit you to recite my name, remember the incantations I'm going to tell you. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Derek's pupils constricted when he heard that, but he didn't dare to get distracted. He recited it over and over again in his heart, then confirmed it with the fool. You have to use a simple ritual and recite my name whenever you return to the City of Silver. One will notify you in advance for future gatherings. You need not pay too much attention to it on other days, nor do you have to avoid anyone. When you receive my notification, isolate yourself within 1,000 heartbeats. Klein told him the method he had been deliberating on for quite some time. This was essentially a response to a prayer. As he had to consider the situation regarding the City of Silver, as well as save time, Klein opted to omit the other steps of the ritual since it was a plea directed toward him. 1,000 heartbeats, Derek muttered to himself. Klein described the general idea of the tarot club to Derek, then took out his pocket watch and looked at the time. Derek froze for a while, instinctively looking at the wondrous item. When 3 approached, Klein extended his hand and pressed on the dark red stars representing Ms. Justice, Mr. Hanged Man, and Mr. Death. Derek didn't blink as he witnessed this. He saw light burst forth opposite and beside him, as three hazy figures extended from within. Audrey Hall surveyed her surroundings and froze suddenly. She then heard the ever-calm voice of Mr. Fool. "This is our newest member, his code name is Sun. This is Miss Justice, that is Mr. Hanged Man, and this is Mr. Dead." Newest member. Audrey was shocked at first, then her shock immediately turned to joy. She was very excited to see the development of the Tarot Club. She felt like a protagonist. The Hanged Man Alger creased his brows, a little upset that the Fool would drag in a new member so suddenly. "He should have at least mentioned it to us. But a great figure like Mr. Fool wouldn't have to care about our feelings," he thought in exasperation before giving a simple greeting to Justice, Death, and the newly added Sun. In this short process, Audrey entered her spectator state and paid close attention to the newest member Sun. "He should be quite young. His body language tells me that he's a little nervous and restrained, but he ultimately maintains a tolerable air of silence, giving the feeling of, a lone wolf, YCS, a lone wolf," Audrey thought as she cast her gaze at the Fool who was seated at the end of the long bronze table. She said in joy, "Mr. Fool, I've collected another 2 pages of Emperor Rassel's diary." Max had remained rather silent as he had already fully digested his potion. Now all he needed to do was ensure the original timeline was followed till the end of Volume 1 of the novel. As long as everything went according to the original script till there, he would be able to advance and would be able to free himself of Klein until much later, where he would require samples of all the Sephiroths. But this was for the far future, so Max just remained silent and listened with a soft smile on his face. Now he would only need to steer conversations away from certain aspects which Klein should not be knowing or acts he should not be performing just yet. Other than that, he could watch the entire scene playing in live action. It was a shame that the Lord of Mysteries had mainly become famous through its novel. They had attempted to make a good comic, but the art was horrendous in comparison to other comics, and they had even tried changing the original plotline to suit themselves. There were even talks of a possible anime coming out, but unfortunately, Samuel had died too early to see it. If there was any consolation to him was that taking the comic as a standard, the anime might not have been anything to spectacle at. The only way it would be good was if it had absolutely insane art, which had only happened to a few anime coming from a certain country. Max shrugged the extra thoughts from his mind as he focused back on the ongoing conversation. Audrey had 2 pages to give to Klein, and in exchange, she asked for the next potion formula after Spectator. She also said she would give Klein some money, an odd notion of giving a god money, but then again, Mac knew that Klein at the moment was still in need of money. Then Derek stepped in and said he could give Audrey the formula, while casually giving away clues about his real location. "I mean, is he asking himself to be doxxed?" Max mused as a slightly larger smile appeared on his face, an odd scene for Klein as he saw the creepy smile, mixed with the silver hair, red eyes, and scar on his eye, making him look like a psychopath. Thankfully Klein's focus was more on Derek, who seemed to be bent on giving out his real-life location. "City of Silver, I have never heard that before. Where is it?" Audrey asked while Alger remained silent. Just as Derek was about to speak, Max decided it was time for him to shock everyone around him. Although he had fully digested his potion and no longer needed to do this, it still felt nice to see a little shock on these novel characters' faces. "I see. So, you are from the land that should only be known to those strong enough. None of us here other than Mr. Fool qualify for this information. Ms. Justice, Mr. Hanged Man, I think it's better not to ask such personal questions. Though I already know too much about all of you, some privacy is in order. Don't you think so too?" Max shrugged and leaned back in his chair. Max looked up and noticed that a tiny crack had gradually formed on his chair, and a deep darkness could be barely visible from his current angle. Instantly, he felt a connection with this, and knew what it was. It was the corruption from the amalgamation of all. Did that mean that the amalgamation of all was of a higher level of existence than the Saphira Castle? Well, considering this castle is just a projection of the real thing's power, which is basically just a door with white worms and cocoons inside at the top of the stairs, it should be rather obvious. Yet, the power, the gray fog here should be something that came directly from the real thing, and considering he was not actively bringing any of the black energy here, meant that it was highly likely that the amalgamation of all should be able to overpower, or even directly corrupt the Saphira Castle. But he would focus on that later and saw that Derek had asked for the Sun Pathway Sequence 9 potion formula in exchange for what he was offering. Ms. Justice did not have it, but then Klein said he would give it to Audrey, in exchange for the 2 pages of the diary, while Audrey would give the formula to Derek in exchange for the formula he wanted. Alger seemed to have wanted to say that he had the possibility of getting the formula but kept silent when Klein spoke, and Max just smirked at these antics. If only he knew Klein's real identity, but then if he really knew all of Klein's real identity, including all the stupidly overpowered beings who were paying attention to him, and even some who had bet everything on him, and those who had done so, but their plans were ruined by others, and the absolute mess of an existence Klein truly was, well, they would be even more scared than now. Damn it, it's influencing me again. I will return to independence the moment I return to my body. Max's smile gradually vanished as he could feel his thoughts being stretched and morphed into something they weren't. As such, he decided not to speak for the rest of the meeting and just kept silent as things proceeded as normal. Klein had clearly given up on hiding Derek's actual location, but still did not say it out loud, and instead made another deal where Derek would be given compensation once he gave the formula to Ms. Justice, by Klein, and in exchange Ms. Justice would give more diary pages to Klein. And the deal was accepted by them, and Klein passed on the Sun Pathways Sequence 9, barred to Audrey, who gave it to Derek. Now that I recall it, most people call the pathways by their Sequence 9, like the Fool pathway being called the Seer's pathway by most people and not the latter, since not many people actually knew of the Fool being the Sequence 0 of that particular pathway. In most cases, even the Beyonders themselves would not know of the true name of their pathway, and just conveniently called it by the respective Sequence 9, Max hummed to himself, trying to distract from the invading forces in his mind. He knew they were not able to actually read his mind, and the force was instead just a vague and weak force of corruption, making his thoughts more and more chaotic with time. While reading the diary pages, Klein motioned for the others to begin the discussion section of the meeting. Mr. Death, the open selection of government officials through examinations that you described previously has already garnered the support of the King and the Prime Minister. It will soon be passed by the House of Lords and the House of Commons and is predicted to be implemented early next year. It looks like the King and the Prime Minister still use their brains, Alger mocked out of habit, while Max just smiled and nodded to her. Andre straightened her back when she saw Mr. Death's affirmative nod. She said with a smile, "Mr. Hanged Man, you got me to check on something for you previously. I've received an answer. The King has been convinced by the Prime Minister and won't seek revenge on the Fasak Empire at the East Balam shore for the time being. I think you can now give me the extra payment that you promised me." Alger thought for a few seconds before saying, "Miss Justice, thank you for your answer. This eases my concerns over certain things. What kind of extra payment do you want? I'll consider it if it's within reason." Audrey smiled, obviously prepared. Clues to the psychology alchemists, or clues to the main ingredients of the potion telepathis? Of course, that can wait until after the Sun hands the formula over to me. No problem, Alger said without hesitation. Then Audrey asked about a certain Beander gathering in Backland by Mr. A, to which Alger responded and gave the information he knew. In exchange, he asked for the location of a pirate named Kilongos, aka Rear Admiral Hurricane. Some chit-chatting where Alger described why the pirate was so dangerous and Derek linked the powers to the Sequence 5 of the Hanged Man pathway, Shepard. Klein turned to Alger and asked, "I hope you received my payment." "Yes, I have. Thank you." Alger had already been informed about the payment. After Audrey accepted the mission and Alger gave the portrait of the pirate, Klein ended the meeting and Max returned to his body in the hotel in Tingen. Without a single extra thought, he left the room through the bathroom door and entered Independence using the Wanderer's key. Finally free. Looks like everything seems to be still going the same as the original plot. It feels like I am in one of those self-insert novels, which were all really badly written copies of the original novel just with an extra character. Well, let's hope my self-insert without changing a single line of the plot continued until the fool dies. Max had naturally cleaned his soul and mind using the black mist from the amalgamation of all as soon as he arrived in Independence and felt a lot calmer after that. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Tarot Club 10th meeting. Time to return to the grind. Max frowned at the books he would continue to learn by heart, and then an idea finally hit him. I should try writing a novel once I am able to. It would be great practice, and also help me remember my life as Samuel, he thought as a grin gradually appeared on his face. Max had the perfect book for this time period in Independent. But first I need to be able to write properly. Another week passed by in a flash with Max mainly studying the language and writing pages of text. August 27, 1349 of the Fifth Epoch. Above the gray fog, Klein leaned back into his chair and tapped his left molar twice to stealthily activate his spirit vision. He saw that the mottled color deep within the sun's ether body had turned pure, akin to the light of dawn. He smiled and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Bard." At the same time, he saw the stars behind the sun's chair shift quickly, turning into the symbol of the sun. Audrey greeted everyone before telling Klein she had pages of the diary and asking Derek for the telepathous potion formula. After that, they completed the deal normally. Well, not quite. Derek's potion formula had a lot of ancient names for ingredients, and so Klein had to translate them to modern names for Audrey to understand what they were. And it was only then that Max had an epiphany. The previous time he had come here he had been too concerned with trying to leave and return to independence as soon as possible to get rid of the outside influence on his mind. He did not think of the possibility of asking Derek for his help in finding the monster potion formula. Audrey, meanwhile, offered extra cash to Klein, who gladly accepted it and told her to send it to his follower, Klein. "Mr. Sun, I would like you to check if you have the sequence 9 monster potion formula. It should be the one descending from silver snakes related to fate." Max tried his best to describe the snakes of Mercury in the novel but stopped himself from mentioning that name. Although the other king of angels was rather insane on their own, this one was particularly so due to its abilities being tied too closely to fate. Max would rather entirely avoid him. Silver snake, I am not quite sure. But a pathway related to fate should exist. I will check and bring you sequence 9 of that pathway next time. Alright, do tell me what you need, when you need it. After that, he returned to silence and just observed the meeting like a spectator, though that was not truly his job. Audrey and Alger once again became their nosy selves and tried to dig into Derek's real location despite Max having warned them. And Max himself also just gave up as a few days of pondering should have given them a good guess on where Derek lived. Then Klein began to read the diary pages he had received, before allowing the others to begin their normal discussions. Everything seemed to go according to the original novel. In fact, Max felt that everything seemed to be going too close to the original novel, as though his very existence did not mean much in the greater scheme of things. But this was a good thing as it meant that there would be very few butterfly effects in the short run from his intervention. Then Alger spoke about how he discovered that Kilongos was in Backland, and how he was there for a mission that could cause a lot of death and destruction. He explained how the pirate admiral believed that after completing this mission and obtaining an item as a reward, his power would reach high sequence and he would become equal to the 4 pirate kings, increasing the number to 5. The Alger tried his best to bait Mr. Fool into sending his believer to help in Alger's mission, with the greed of a mysterious object that could help someone reach a high sequence but failed. On the other hand, Klein was lampooning about not being able to help Alger and get the item for himself, solely because he was too weak to interfere in such matters. Seeing the odd situation and matching it to the inner thoughts of Klein he recalled from the novel, Max just tried his best to hold back his laughter. And with Klein deep in thought, he ended the meeting right there. Max returned to his body and took in a deep breath to settle his mind. Compared to before thought, this process was a lot smoother and easier since he had already fully digested his potion. "Mister, you are awake, come and have some snacks. We made it ourselves," a demisol said while tugging Max's sleeve. Max smiled but halted in the process of getting up, and instead closed his eyes for an instant where he quickly entered the amalgamation of all and cleansed his mind and soul before returning to his body. Sure, he left his hotel room and went to the one next door, which he had rented out for all the kids to stay at. He did not mind a demisol and Tom bringing along 3 other kids. Money was not a problem for him, and their background was also not a problem. They were all orphans, their parents having been either killed on the streets of Tingen or elsewhere and had nowhere to go. As such, taking them in and indoctrinating the teachings of the primordial unity was a good plan, and he left it up to Tom and a demisol to complete this task. It was also something to keep them busy while he learned the new language of Athens in independence, away from the constant corruption in his mind. After a bit of high tea with the rather poorly made honey biscuits made by Max's 2 subordinates and their own 3 subordinates, he thanked them for the delicious meal and returned to independence. August 31, 1349 of the 5th epoch. Over these past few days, Max had become considerably more comfortable with speaking, reading and writing the language of Athens. Though he was not completely fluent, he would still be able to understand the other person as long as they had a second gap between sentences. And Howe had confirmed this by conducting 3 tests on 3 very willing experiment partners who met with unfortunate accidents while being let go. Max had, surprisingly, not felt much upon killing those he did not care about. Perhaps it was the fusion of 2 souls that created this effect. Perhaps it was the soul of unity that did this, since it likely saw all humans as nothing but insects created by a powerful being, the creation itself going against what the reality should be. Or perhaps it was just the way Max was from the beginning. Although Samuel was cruel and would do anything for his goals back on the original Earth, he had definitely never taken a life and had never planned on doing so. Yet here his soul was, casually dealing with problems before they could come back to hinder his progress without batting an eye. But that did not matter, as he could finally begin his plans. First, he closed his eyes and entered the amalgamation of all, then appeared Castle Black, then right outside it within the black liquid. The castle itself did not have any windows or doors for the projections of individuals from inside to leave, so he had no worries about that. Still, some parts of the wall were see-through, so he created a wall of opaque blackness to stop those from Castle Black from seeing this area of the amalgamation of all. Then, he raised his palm and immediately the black liquid churned and rapidly formed another isolated space like Castle Black. Only this one was not just a large room but seemed more like a modern-day church, but with an incredibly tall throne in the middle. At a glance, the throne appeared to be made of absolutely nothing, and yet, everything at the same time. And emptiness that seemed to contain all of something. In front of the throne were rows and rows of seats made of blackness, with an aisle for walking in the middle and to the sides. There were black flames lighting up the entire space, as well as a door that led to private rooms for private discussions that would not require him to constantly divide people up like Klein had relegated himself to doing in his Sephiroth. After that, set up screens in front of each of the seats, all connected to a central system. This would facilitate communication and exchanges that could be done without talking in person. Max did not use this for Castle Black because he did not want to confuse each person who arrived with a new system of information and technology that did not belong to this era. He also put the doctrine of his church into the central system, involving praying before eating, praying before combat, and praying once a day either when waking up or in the morning. Naturally, he did not make any compulsory Sunday praying, since he would rather his followers either rest on those days or work, either making themselves more productive for the future or being productive in the present. After that, he set up a lot of rules, which would automatically force people out of the church, which he decided to call the Unity headquarters. Of course, he had also set up things that would cut the connection between the people whose connections Max created personally if required. After that, he set up a lot of rules, which would automatically force people out of the church, which he decided to call the Unity headquarters. Of course, he had also set up things that would cut the connection between the people whose connections Max created personally if required, like in the cases of them somehow managing to become corrupted by some supreme creature. After all, Samuel had this vague memory of there being an endless number of pathways out in the cosmos, which meant there were basically an infinite number of potential great old ones like the outer gods, who might have either not reached that level of power, or were somehow not affected by the law of Beander characteristics convergence. Thus, it was always better to be careful with such things. Then, Max returned to his body, and went back to Earth. Ademisal and Tom, I will be leaving for some time. Ademisal, remember that praying to Unity will allow you to gain the protective energy that will keep your powers at bay, but you need to have either the bracelet or the ring with you for it to actually work. Tom, I have given you a bracelet and ring as well, but they will not suppress your abilities unless you want them to. These are mainly there in case Ademisal loses his. Do take care of him. And Ademisal, take care of the 3 kids you have taken in. I have made a bank account for you, Tom, with enough money, but use it only when needed for things like food and a place to stay. Make sure not to spend any on toys and chocolates unless needed. I will know where you spend everything. Also Tom, I hope you have learned a lesson from Pritz Harbor about not letting Ademisal do whatever he wants to do. He is still too naive. Also, I want you two to teach those 3 about mysticism. Properly, and about Unity and praying to Unity. But make sure never to tell them about your powers unless the 2 of you are in danger. Ademisal, I do not want more children being adopted by you or Tom, or those 3 either. 5 children is enough and I do not want to babysit any more children. Not that I actually do much of the babysitting of the new kids, but still. Alright, now comes the most important thing. Once I go through the door, I want you to pray to the primordial unity. The door is already placed on the symbol, and the candles are also lit. Just pray and offer the door to him. Then, when I need to return, he will call on you to set up the ritual once again in a safe place, and you will summon the door back. Remember, without doing it properly, I will not be able to return, so this is a very important burden I am placing on the 2 of you. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Tom and Ademisal responded, the former speaking as though he was in the military, while the latter just trying his best to imitate Tom, but ending up calling Max what he calls him normally. Good. And Tom, remember what I told you about the official Beander. If they come to recruit you, do not resist and just join them. They will not be able to read your mind and any other form of getting secrets out of you will not work, and all you have to do is lick about me the primordial unity and his ability to contact you. Just blame it on me forcing you to become Beyonders and you just barely surviving. Yes sir, I have remembered my backstory, and so has Ademisal. I checked it myself. Good, then I will be going. Goodbye, for now. Goodbye sir. Bye, Mr. Max pulled out the Wanderer's key and walked through the door. High Priest at Independence. Clip-clop. A horse slowly trotted on a path that had its greenery beaten out of it by the constant passing of humans, horses, and carriages. On this lone horse was a young man who looked around the age of 15, wearing loose brown clothes and a gray cloak. In one hand was the reins to the horse, rather crudely made using rope and wood, while in the other was a book made of coarse yellow paper. A charcoal pencil which was used in this word by moderately wealthy people as a form of bookkeeping and note-making was floating in the air, trying to gradually write down on the book while moving. Max could have normally been able to use his abilities to write stuff using a combination of pushing and pulling the object in different directions. However, doing so while moving, and on an unstable and unpredictable platform like a horse made it incredibly difficult. If his brain was twice as powerful as it currently was, then it may have been possible, but sadly he was not in a fantasy world ruled by a game-like system that allowed you to just increase your intelligence and wisdom using points. Instead, he was in this stupid universe where everything came at a price, and everything was connected to everything. The only consolation he had was that independence seemed to be far enough from Earth to be away from super powerful beings whose names should not even be thought about by normal people. This exercise, however, allowed him to gradually improve his ability to make fine control his ability. Compared to what it seemed in the novel, where the individual instantly learned everything regarding their abilities the moment they advanced, and the only thing they could do was to improve their digestion of the potion and take the next potion, Max found that his control over his abilities was gradually improving. Though its power and reach were not changing at all, the finer control was improving, which he felt glad about since such a gradual yet ever-present improvement was something that was incredibly rewarding. As he gradually approached the capital of the Kingdom of Athens, Sparta. Compared to the extravagant name of the kingdom, which Max had shortened to Athens, the capital of the country was named rather simply, and ironically. But that was a feeling only Max felt since the people of this world did not know he had named their kingdom Athens, nor did they know of the history behind the two. Still, just like the simple name, the capital itself was also rather simple. It was mainly a large village from the current Earth's perspective, with predominantly wooden houses, and a 1-meter-tall wall crudely built using stones of all sizes, and something that looked like a type of primitive glue or mortar. There were, however, a few much larger houses with personal stone fencing that seemed to be made of properly cut stone. These houses were also made of a decent amount of metal support to the wood, as well as a good amount of stone near the foundation of them. Max observed through the open gates of the city as he approached them. Halt, who are you, and why are you here? Why hello there. Who I am is of no importance. I am merely a humble servant. Who I serve is what the 2 astute sirs should take notice of, Max said while getting off his horse in front of the 2 guards of Sparta. There were normal clothes with no armor or protection to speak of, and the only thing that made them guards were the wooden spears with metal tips they held in their arms. And would that be the one true God, the primordial unity? Max said while raising his hands to the sky. As he said those words, while keeping a polite smile on his face and having his eyes closed with his head looking at the sky, Max activated his ability and increased the density of the air he was touching, and then moved that air using push towards the two guards. Instantly, they felt it had become slightly harder to breathe upon the mention of this true god the stranger mentioned, and immediately they became slightly frightful. Something like this had only been told to them in stories, which meant it was either a demon or a witch. But perhaps, it could also be a god. They were confused, and Max simply put back his hands to normal and the pressure vanished as he stopped using his abilities. I would need a meeting with the kings of Athens. I know I will not get such a meeting from the city guards, so would you kindly bring your superior here so I can get on with the Lord's business? One of them finally broke free from their collective stupor and whispered into the other's ear, before running away, leaving Max with the still stunned city guard. A while later, a burly-looking man walked out to Max, and this one actually had a metal sword, as well as chainmail armor. Clearly, he was a lot higher up on the hierarchy. I have heard you want a meeting with His Majesty. That would be true. And what makes you think someone like you would be able to meet His Majesty? Because the Lord, the primordial unity declared it so. That's it. You are talking about demons. Bang. Do not desecrate the name of the Lord. He is the one true God. He is the primordial unity. His name shall not be besmirched by anyone. Max had reached out with his delicate-looking hand and successfully touched the burly soldier, instantly doubling the weight of the chainmail to that of full-plate armor, causing him to buckle under the pressure and kneel on the ground as he had not expected the sudden change in weight. Immediately after, Max retracted his powers and his hand from the man's shoulder and reached out his hand to help the soldier up. My apologies, I lost my temper there. It just happens when someone blasphemes the Lord. I assume you should feel the same should someone call your family and loved ones a bunch of whores and cowards. Max helped up the bulky man, who began coughing when he heard Max's last words. The soldier was incredibly close to just pulling out his sword in anger at the spot, and then the word finally registered in his mind. He instantly understood why this priest of God had reacted the way he had reacted. But then the feeling that made him kneel also registered in his mind as he quickly came to the conclusion that God might truly be represented by this priest, and he might not be just some extravagant charlatan. I understand, Mr. Priest. Can I have your name so that I may appoint a meeting? I am Max Verstappen, but you can just call the High Priest of the Primordial Unity. High Priest. Got it. Please follow me. Meeting the king. After that, Max just followed the bulky soldier, his gray cloak's hood lifted up and behind him to expose his young appearance, with silver hair and red eyes, as well as a scar running across his face on one of his eyes. Soon he arrived at one of the central buildings in Sparta, the one with the best fences, the largest lawn, and the best wood. Max was brought inside after the burly man talked with the one who looked like the butler of this place, and was made to sit down in the waiting room of the house. Around 20 minutes later, another burly-looking man with a rough beard, yet wearing relatively good clothes compared to the commoners of Sparta appeared in front of him. With this Max had confirmed that the people in this world still selected their leaders based on their fighting abilities or something similar, rather than their lineage or right to the throne. Perhaps there might not even be a throne in the current state of the world. Or perhaps this kingdom was just one that was self-proclaimed, a kingdom only in name trying to imitate the other actual kingdoms around it. Max felt that this was quite likely considering it had only taken him a day of traveling from the village he had arrived to Independence at, all the way to the capital of the Athens kingdom. Good morning, your kingship. The king saw opposite Max and waved his hand for him to also be seated. As the soldier might have mentioned, I am here to discuss some important matters with you, regarding the setting up of the Church of the Primordial Unity within your kingdom. The king remained silent for a period of time, before a slight smirk appeared under his bear as he asked, amused. Why would I allow something like that? Instantly, Samuel understood what kind of person this king was, and the thoughts were also understood by Max, who began speaking. Honestly, the very fact that an actual god is who I am representing should have swung you to my side, but it seemed that is not the kind of person you are. Am I right, your kingship? The smile on the king's face gradually faded as he instantly understood that Max had deduced his personality from one sentence he spoke and his body language. He simply nodded while putting more focus on Max, the Grand Priest of the Primordial Unity. All right, you seem to be the more rational kind of person, who would believe in cold hard facts over something like an intangible notion of God. But let me first dissuade your delusion that gods do not exist. For the powers I have been given by him, I could easily take the lives of every single person present in the room. He causally picked up the metal spoon reserved for guests from the table between himself and the king while speaking, and as soon as he was done speaking, he drastically increased the density of the spoon, before launching it with push through the wooden walls, making the spoon go through like there was nothing there, without actually moving the fingers or hand that were holding the spoon. The king and the soldier, whose hand was already on his sword when Max spoke his rather insulting words, felt their mouths hanging agape at the Grand Priest's actions. However, doing something like that would only increase your hostilities towards me and my lord, so I will not do that. You just did though, the soldier cursed in his mind as he let go of his sword at his majesty's gesture. Instead, I will list out the various benefits your kingdom would receive from helping me build my church, your kingdom that barely qualifies as such. Firstly, and most importantly, unlike the pseudo-religions that some charlatans may have spread across these lands, a real God is actually going to be the center of this religion. As such, there will never be anyone who could survive within the church that could even remotely be considered corrupt in any way. I hope that removes your doubts about possible abuses of power. No such thing could ever happen. Next, my lord does not request any donations from the kingdom or force any believers into doing anything other than pray to him before each meal, and before going to war. I have also observed that your kingdom is highly dependent on barter, which is a good system from small villages, but if you want to grow your kingdom, you will need a fixed currency. As such, I would like to propose for the Church of Unity to handle the creation of your currency and prepare a fully functional system for it. Other than that, we will be establishing a faith which can help with not only bringing together your kingdom as a whole, but also preventing and rooting out any possible rebellions. Another very important factor is for each priest of the primordial unity to be able to send messages to each other through prayer. Which means you would not have to rely on messengers riding on horseback throughout your kingdom, and at least for important messages like military-related stuff, you could utilize the priests to communicate instantly through prayer. Though, you should know that only grand priests would be given powers and abilities like I have been bestowed with, so you do not have to worry about the normal priests having superpowers. Other than that, I have also been bestowed with a vast amount of knowledge pertaining to developing a kingdom, and I would be willing to share that with you for a few conditions, but that can be discussed later once you have enough faith in the church after we prove our reliability. After all, I don't take you for someone who would trust someone so easily just from a few words and promises. The king remained silent for a while. Such a proposal was indeed very enticing. Ignoring the demonic powers displayed by this grand priest, Max had told them of abilities like instant message transmission, ignoring distance, and the impossibility of corrupt leaders in the church, which had made the proposal even more enticing. Most religions, or as Max called them, pseudo-religions, only tried to entice him with portions of the wealth they would earn from the general public, or something worse, and would end up with them having been decapitated on the spot for preaching false religions. Originally he had wanted to do the same with Max, but soon he realized he was not dealing with a religious fanatic of a non-existent god, nor was he facing a charlatan who only wanted to make a quick sum of wealth and flee. He was instead talking with an intelligent person who knew what he as a king wanted, and was willing to give exactly that to him in exchange was exactly what he wanted. He had set everything on the table and was now waiting for him to reply. The king thought for a few moments before finally agreeing, but with conditions. All right, but your church will forever have to remain loyal to my bloodline. That can be arranged. However, Your Majesty, you will have to allow the church some concessions in exchange for this. Like what? Like allowing us to have our own standing army to protect the church's properties, and allowing us to punish those who have actively or otherwise harmed those of the church, or have crossed the line that separates humanity from common animals. Of course, we will naturally be providing proof of everything before carrying out any actual punishment, but we reserve the right to apprehend such individuals lest they leave the kingdom after committing such atrocities. Acceptable. The king had already made his decision, and the concessions the church was asking for were nothing great. In essence, he was asking for the right to justice, and the right to punish evil, both of which were something he could agree with. Max shook the king's hand and then stood up. All right then, Your Majesty, it will be an honor to work with you for the betterment of this kingdom. After Max was escorted out of the house and left to his own devices within what could only be described as a crude town, the large soldier who appeared to be the captain of the city guard, and the king were left alone in the room. The king took in a deep breath and sighed, while the large guard coughed and asked, "Should I fetch the old man?" "No need, Bruce. I have already made my decision and the old man will not change it. Just send someone to keep an eye on Max." "As you wish." The burly man who had been identified as Bruce bowed slightly before leaving as well, preparing to send one of his subordinates to secretly keep an eye on Max. Unknown to the king and his guardsmen, Max had already left, the royal decree signed by the king in his hand. He would not be returning to the capital for quite some time. Currently, he was heading to one of the surrounding towns of Athens, with a much smaller population, but also an equally smaller number of issues that needed to be solved. This was where he would set up the first outpost of the Church of Unity. The headquarters would naturally not have a physical form and instead be located in the amalgamation of all, next to Castle Black. Back on Earth, Tingen. Klein passed the test by the Evernight Goddess and was successfully promoted to Sequence 8, Clown. Isaac Eggers also gives him the copper whistle in case of danger. Max already knew this would happen, but there was the chance that his existence may have changed things despite the seemingly strong resistance the original plot of the novel had to his presence. Thus, he sent Tom, though a mission given by the unnamed, Mr. who took care of the two kids, to keep an eye on Klein in secret, while a demisol would take care of, and teach the newly joined kids about Unity. Tom was rather quick to accept the mission after learning it was from the Blessed of Unity, that took the two kids in and helped them become independent of others. Time passed quickly and Max was satisfied with the seemingly unchangeable plot of the novel, at least for now, as he returned to Earth for the Tarot Club meeting. He did not want to take the risk of either the connection failing due to distance or other factors, or his actual location to be exposed to any of the powerful beings of this universe. As such, he left the town where he had just liberated the people from a dictatorial leader who wanted to keep all the wealth and luxuries to himself. He had also spread the name of the church among the people, and all that was left here was to actually build the church and start accepting people. That could wait, for the Tarot Club was about to be in session. September 3rd, Road 1349 of the 5th Epoch. Tarot Club 11th Meeting. September 3rd, 1349 of the 5th Epoch. In the auspicious castle above the grey fog, Max recovered his sight as the crimson saturation of the world around him melted away to reveal the colorless grey fog. Technically, black and white are not colors, but shades. So gray, something in between the two, should also not be a color. I may be wrong, but until proven so, I will go with this thought process. Audrey, who appeared to be in deep thought while rather successfully masking it behind indifference and slight innocence, greeted everyone. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Good afternoon, Mr. Hanged Man. Good afternoon, Mr. Sun. And good afternoon, Mr. Death. After they greeted one another, Klein saw that Miss Justice was indicating her desire to speak, therefore, he nodded faintly to express his permission. Honorable Mr. Fool, I wonder if your adorer has received the compensation of 300 pounds. Audrey asked, holding back her urge to talk about Kilongos while she showed concern over her leader's adorer. Klein smiled and said, I didn't pay close attention to this matter. But as my adorer didn't request additional help, I suppose he has already received it. Max smirked internally, imagining how jubilant Klein, the future beggar god, would have been at suddenly coming across such a great sum of money. The person in question, Klein, did have such thoughts. But he was also intrigued by the odd clothing Max was wearing, which looked like something from at least a few hundred years ago. That's great. Audrey relaxed and looked across her. Mr. Hanged Man, there's been progress regarding Kilongos. Alger suddenly sat up straight. He couldn't hide his excitement as he asked, where is he? Unfortunately, he noticed our investigations just after we discovered his tracks. He killed one of the personnel involved. Audrey repeated the highlights of Zio's and Furz's story and explained their follow-up plan in detail. Max had a pleasant smile on his face as he recalled the source of the information Ms. Justice was giving to Alger just now. He couldn't help but reminisce the bittersweet story that the two friends had to face together due to the horrors of this world and the worse horrors that lay outside. Alger nodded faintly and said, I'll pay close attention. Then, he turned to the side and looked towards the seat of honor at the long bronze table. Under the vacant gaze of the sun, Derek, who listened but didn't understand anything, said, Honorable Mr. Fool, if I were to find out Kilongo's true intention and the very important and magical item that he intends to obtain, please allow me to recite your name and inform you through the ritual. He didn't repeat his request for the fool's adorer to provide him assistance. As he brought it up before and the fool had given his answer, there was no need to harp on the topic. Otherwise, it might provoke the god. Hence, Alger made it clear that his intention was only to report his findings. If the final temptation was sufficient, he believed that Mr. Fool's adorer would definitely appear. That works. Audrey widened her eyes. I should have asked for the right to report as well. I might be able to gain Mr. Fool's guidance occasionally, she thought with regret. Under everyone's gaze, Klein leaned back into his chair and nodded faintly. He replied slowly, "You may." Alger heaved a sigh of relief when he heard the fool's answer. He lowered his head and humbly said, "Please allow me to thank you in advance." Max was sure Klein was thinking about how exactly he would be able to convince Mr. Azek to go and help him when he needed it. Though it was none of his concern. All he needed to do was ensure that everything went according to the original plan, and the world itself also seemed to want it to happen as such. This left Max with a bitter taste in his mouth as he realized how fate, or the concept of something or someone dictating the actions and ultimate endings of the vast majority of people seemed to see exist here. It was as though the original novel had become the script that would be followed through to the end by the world, one way or another. Will I really be able to do anything to change the story when it truly matters? Max often thought about this when planning for the future. He had already realized that this corrective force seemed to ignore his actions, and just correct the world around him, bypassing the things he changed. Like a demisol, the kid's original fate was to continue suffering due to his state as a half-monster. But his intervention changed this, and the world did not change much, only correcting the broader narrative of everything. But what would happen if that broader narrative was something that Max wanted to or ended up changing? Would the corrective force also ignore it and change the future by introducing stronger variables, or would it outright destroy him before bringing back balance? Many thoughts went through Max's mind, and the same could be said for Klein. The hanged man Alger looked at the fool and spoke once again, "I'm about to receive a batch of pages from Emperor Rassel's diary. I believe that I can present them to you in the next gathering, or the gathering after that." According to the arrangement of the Church of the Lord of Storms, Fritz Harbor was under the jurisdiction of the Backland Diocese. Thus, Alger could enter the capital and wait for Rear Admiral Hurricane Kilongos to show himself under the guise of reporting about his previous voyage. Backland had been the headquarters of the Church of the Lord of Storms until the end of the last epoch, having shifted their holy altar to Passu Island only after the establishment of the Loan Kingdom. Regardless, the status of the Church of the Lord of Storms in Backland was second only to the headquarters of the seven great churches. One could imagine the information the Church of the Lord of Storms held. Under these circumstances, Alger was confident that he would be able to collect pages of Emperor Rassel's diary in the name of research. After all, they were indecipherable at present. Klein allowed joy to color his tone, as he said with a gentle nod, "Very good." Audrey Hall hurriedly spoke up when she saw the conversation between the hanged man and the fool end. "Honorable Mr. Fool, may I recite your name and inform you using a ritual should I receive any timely and useful information?" Klein nodded slightly, saying past the fog, "You may." "Great." Audrey secretly clenched her fists. At the same time, Klein turned to look at the son, Derek Berg, who had been silently listening to their conversations. He spoke, his tone was peaceful. "The same goes for you as well." "Yes, Mr. Fool." Derek lowered his head. Max observed as things played out much in the same way as before, and he refrained from interfering much, still lost in the existential crisis he was going through. Audrey asked for an item and Alger said he would be able to find it for her in exchange for finding Kilongos. Alger really must have a thing for the dude. Well, we partake in no kink-shaming here, Max thought to himself as he brought himself out of his own thoughts and back to the important discussion going on. After the end of the transaction discussions, Klein looked around, then turned to the son. He asked in a gentle tone, "Does the City of Silver still believe in gods?" Derek replied in a respectful tone, "We still believe in the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God." Keck. Unknowingly, Max let out a slight chuckle but then suppressed it and waved off the interested looks of those around him. "Pardon my actions. Please continue, little son." Klein wasn't surprised at all. He purposely chuckled and asked in reply, "Even though he abandoned you?" "Abandoned? The Creator abandoned the City of Silver?" Alger was shocked, suddenly when he made the connection regarding a particular term. The Forsaken Land of the Gods. In the confidential information of the Church of the Lord of Storms, at the security clearance level that Alger, who was captain equivalent to the bishop level, could access, the Forsaken Land of the Gods had always only been a name with no actual description. However, it clearly pointed towards the end of the Sonia Sea. From what he knew, even the cardinals at the core of the church had no idea what the Forsaken Land of the Gods represented. But only the leader of the church, the proxy of the Lord of Storms, knew something about the situation and seemed to be taking charge of the hidden mission to look for the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Audrey wasn't particularly moved about it. The only time that she had heard about the forsaken land of the gods was from the hanged man's question. She wasn't particularly interested, so she failed to associate it with anything from what Mr. Fool said earlier. Audrey wasn't particularly moved about it. The only time that she had heard about the forsaken land of the gods was from the hanged man's question. She wasn't particularly interested, so she failed to associate it with anything from what Mr. Fool said earlier. The City of Silver has the legend about being abandoned by the Creator. Huh, Mr. Hanged Man seems to be deeply affected. What is he amazed and afraid of? Audrey nodded in puzzlement as she remembered the details of the moment. Yes, we believe that we will regain the Lord's favor in the end. Perhaps, it will be on the day the sun rises again. Derek Berg answered in an uncertain tone. We were once ruled by the giant's royal family, and we worshipped the giant King Ormir. Later, we were saved by the Lord and we will never betray the Lord again. Ruled by the giant's royal family. It really is ancient, but it doesn't seem to match. Alger, who had guessed at something, suddenly recalled the description about the second epic in the hidden chapter of the Book of Storms. The second epic was also known as humanity's dark epic. At the time, the sky, ocean, and land were ruled over by dragons, giants, elves, mutants, devils, phoenixes, demonic wolves, and dead spirits. But in the end, the Lord of Storms, the eternal blazing sun, and the God of knowledge and wisdom led humanity into defeating the supernatural creatures and ushered in the beginning of the third epic, the glorious era, which was later known as Cataclysm. Klein nodded deliberately but didn't think any further and asked calmly, do you still offer sacrifices to this omnipotent God? Yes, we still do. But since the day we were abandoned, we have never gotten any response. Derek's voice had a hint of unconcealed pain. Klein leaned against the back of his chair leisurely. He half closed his eyes and said, describe the process of your offering ritual in detail. Derek didn't notice the weight that was hanging on his answer as he replied frankly. We build opulent altars covered in the Lord's symbol. Every time we receive a bumper black-faced grass harvest, we hold a sacrificial ritual. We use the monsters we capture in the depths of the darkness to use as sacrificial offerings. After we recite God's honorable title and the necessary prayers, we dance for him and then kill the monsters, to let their spirituality and tainted blood dye the entire altar. If we haven't caught any monsters, then we use a sinner on the lowest floor in the City of Silver prison instead. Then, we turn the very first batch of black-faced grass into food and serve it before the Lord. In the end, we sing praises in unison and end the ritual. Klein used his mysticism knowledge to analyze every step of the sacrificial ritual in the City of Silver before finally saying, what are the corresponding prayers? What language do you recite them in? Derek was also looking forward to this, so as to gain hints from Mr. Fool on how to shake off the curse, so he recalled it carefully and answered, we use Jotun, which is also our common language. The corresponding prayers are, your devoted believers pray for your attention. We pray for you to take their offerings. We pray for you to open the gates to your kingdom. Klein listened in silence and intentionally let the engulfing fog slowly swirl around him. He nodded as though deep in thought and remained silent. After some more communication, Klein ended the gathering. He watched Justice's, the Hanged Man's, Death's and the Sun's figures vanish before him. He looked down and saw the boundless gray fog and crimson stars that seemed eternally immutable. However, after he advanced to sequence 8, he realized that he could connect even more stars. In other words, he could pull in more members. At least 2. Klein nodded indiscernibly. He wasn't in a hurry to add new members. He planned to act as he had before. He would first wait and observe. If Justice and the Hanged Man had any recommendations, he could assess them first. What I saw the last few times was when the sun was praying. There was a clear crystal ball before him, but ever since I pulled him into the world above the gray fog, that crystal ball has never appeared again. Does the prerequisite needed to pull people in through the connection of the crimson star have something to do with having a special item around them? Or does every crimson star correspond to an item in reality, which, when it's connected successfully, it would return to the world above the gray fog? I wonder if Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man were the same. Let's just assume that's the case. In that case, if people without this special item were to recite, the fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck, and allow me to hear their prayers, would I be able to pull them in? I can give it a try in the future. Klein paused for a moment as his gaze turned towards the slightly tilted seat, Mr. Death's seat. The amount of black substance that seemed to be corrupting the gray fog had only increased over time, but now that he had advanced to sequence 8, he might as well try to get rid of it once and for all. And so, he tried and failed miserably. Ultimately, he sighed deeply before leaving the space above the gray fog. Thus, Max returned to his body, and without waiting for much time, walked right back through the door, instructing Ademisal and Tom to perform the exact same ritual again, making the door on Earth, and the door on Independence vanish into the amalgamation of all for safekeeping. This is not counted in the word count. Anyway, I am here to inform you that I am back to writing this novel. In the middle, I began reading this comic called A Nebulous Civilization and was intrigued by the plot, so I began reading the novel. To the point that I then put this fanfic aside to write another one. Only for me to realize I work a lot better when trying to do two things at once. Like writing two novels simultaneously, surprise surprise, I wrote 2 chapters in just 1 hour, though the next chapter is only 1,000 words as compensation for how long this chapter has been. And thus you have this chapter being released. The next chapter on Wednesday at 0000 web novel time. Do comment on what you think about this chapter. Also, next chapter will focus on me in the new world, just as promised. Bear witness. Max observed the small rural town, rather similar to the one he had first arrived to this world in. Except, it was currently being ravaged by a rather large beast. It looked like a very large boar, with a black horn on its forehead, the total body length reaching an astounding 3 meters, and its height towering over humans at 2.5 meters. Max observed as 3 people were either impaled by the insanely sharp horn, or stomped into past by its hooves. All the surrounding people had already run away into the surrounding houses, hoping that the rotting wood they would protect them from something that would rather evidently give the guards in the capital of Athens a very hard time even surviving. It is almost perfectly set up, Max mused as he continued walking towards it, unhindered, undaunted, unperturbed. The few people cowering and shivering in their houses noticed the strange man in a gray hood walking slowly but steadily towards the monster. The creature itself also noticed this easy prey. Compared to the ones that were hiding, this one was out in the open and it would definitely get it. It quickly steadied itself and began its charge. Its muscles propelled it at high speeds at its prey, while some of the weak-willed onlookers closed their eyes out of fright. Max simply raised his palm and spread out his fingers at the best. God, please bear witness. He timed his sentence to end as soon as the horn touched his hand, and instantly he activated Repel on the beast to stop its movement, but also activated Attract to prevent it from being thrown away instantly. The shock from being forced to a full stop had rattled the creature's mind, so it did not move much. Bear witness for the sins of this creature. It is not killing out of necessity or hunger, but out of bloodlust. It is killing for the sake of killing. And it is killing women, children, and innocents. Bear witness for the sins of the creature, or not its own. Its body is covered in festering wounds, made by the sharp blades of humans, who refused to put the beast out of its misery. Beat witness for the wounds were infected, causing the beast to survive, but barely, in constant pain cating away its sanity. Bear witness, at the lives lost to the monster, that had its hand forced by other humans. Bear witness, O primordial unity. And with that, he shifted his palm down, while it was still in contact with the creature's horn. He tripled the density of the creature's brain, causing it to be flattened under its own weight without actually causing any visible damage to the creature. Bear witness, as humanity prevails once more. Boom! The creature fell to the ground, unable to stand on its feet, and then collapsed to its side. Max turned to look at the small red dot on it, swiftly wiping it with the thumb of his other hand. Phew, that was close. Max had to time everything perfectly. He had to use the Repel ability at the very instant that he qualified the contact condition of the ability, all while also timing the speech that he would give to the people. He turned back to the people, and took out a knife, stabbing the head of the creature for proof. The creature is now dead. It is all right to come out. God, the primordial unity declares it so. After that, he continued walking to the 5 people he had seen being killed by the creature since he arrived. He turned to a woman who was coming out of her house while instructing her children to remain inside. Are these all who died? However, she did not respond and instantly broke down in tears as she knelt next to what was previously her husband, yet now lay there as nothing but blood and bones. An elderly man came out next from another house and nodded at Max. Yes, we lost 5 people from what I saw. Unless the monster killed more on the way here. We still have not heard from the hunting party that had gone to hunt down this very monster, as it had been attacking carriages that came to our village. I see. Then we must hold a funeral before searching for the hunting party. Max stated as a matter of fact. God, witness me, as I send these unfortunate souls to your divine kingdom. May they rest in peace, O primordial unity. Max said while tracing the slightly complicated unity symbol on his chest where his heart normally was. After that, he turned back to the elderly man who was slightly stunned at the words coming from the young man. Which direction had the hunting part gone in? That way. All right, I am Max, by the way, the head priest of the Church of the Primordial Unity. After saying that, Max went back to the corpse of the beast and used his knife to break off the horn from its head, using a bit of density manipulation to make the knife heavy enough to break it clean off in one single strike. For proof of slaying the beast, Max said as he put the horn into the backpack he had been carrying and began walking away from the village once more, in the direction of the hunting party. Joys of life. In the forest, a few kilometers from the rural town. Do you hear that? One man whispered to the other men in the group, causing the rest of them to grip their rather primitive weapons tightly, turning to their backs where the distant crunching noise originated from. It is the monster, but why is it behind us? Another whispered as a realization struck him. Did it go to the town before coming here? The crunching sound of something stepping on the dried leaves and branches on the ground continued to sound out, getting ever closer with cash step. The tension of the group also continued to rise until the bushes in front of them rustled for a bit. Suddenly, a human hand popped out of the bush, causing everyone to flinch slightly, but later they calmed down as a second hand came out and pulled the bush apart, allowing for a normal human to pass through and enter their sights. Max looked at the 6 people in regular clothes, and what could only be called stone tools. Well, the man at the center did have a steel sword, so he was likely the strongest person in the town in terms of physical combat ability. Hello there, are you the hunting party that set out from the small town in that direction, by any chance? The man at the front took a step forward, his hand still on his blade that had long been pulled out of its sheath. That would be us. Who might you be? I am the high priest of the Church of the Primordial Unity. I have already received permission to spread my religion in the kingdom from the king himself. I can show you the royal decree later on. But first, I need to inform you about a few things. Firstly, the beast that has been terrorizing your town has been dealt with, by the Primordial Unity, through me. I have its horn with me for proof. However, the more pressing news is that the beast had attacked the town and killed a few people by the time I found it. Thus, I think we should be heading back to help with the wounded and reconstruction. Oh no, exclaimed the man who had the premonition about the beast going to their town. Meanwhile, Max pulled out the horn he had just cut off the beast and presented it to the swordsman, who accepted it and hit his sword against it a few times, only barely successful in chipping off a bit of material from it. In fact, Max had also had a hard time removing the horn, which was why he had simply broken the bit of cartilage holding the horn to the bone of the beast's skull. We need to get back. The swordsman had a sense of urgency as he handed back the horn to Max and quickly began walking, checking the trees on the way for markings they had made on the way here, to prevent them from getting lost in the forest. The group and Max followed behind, as Max went into greater detail on what he saw and who died. When he got to the latter aspect, one of the men on the team suddenly stopped walking as tears began streaming from his red eyes. Apparently, of the 5 people who were killed, one of them was his wife who was pregnant, and another was his mother. The poor sod was left with nobody since his father had long since passed on. Max also stopped for a moment and turned to face the mentally unstable man. He stretched out his hand and patted the man's shoulder, also slightly lowering his density to make him lighter for a few moments. You know, the primordial unity accepts the souls of all, and when they meet him, they are asked 2 questions. Their answers determine whether they were able to enter heaven or not. Have you found joy in your life? And, has your life brought joy to others? Live your life. Live with the joy of knowing that this joy will bring them happiness. Do not be sad for they have passed. Be happy, for they had lived. And with that, Max turned back and continued walking, ignoring the disheveled man who seemed to be undergoing an intense internal conflict. If he could make it through that struggle without killing himself, his mentality would undergo a strong change, and Max would rather have him as a follower. The swordsman looked at the scene with an odd glint in his eyes. However, he did not speak and just continued to walk, hoping that what this priest was saying was either a falsehood, or at the very least, an exaggeration of the death toll. When the group arrived at the village, they were devastated to find that 7 people had died. It had taken Max a day to find the hunting party and another day for them to return successfully. In this period of time, 2 other people who were injured by the beast died to their wounds and infection respectively, raising the death toll from 5 to 7. Max just sighed as he steeled himself to make full use of this incident to quickly grow his influence on the townspeople and hopefully adopt all the children whose parents were no longer alive. Duke Negan and Simulaton, September 6, 1349 of the 5th Epoch. Backland. Tom watched vigilantly as Ademisal instructed the 3 children on the topics of mysticism. The mainstreams of mysticism are highly restrictive on what you can learn, what you can do, and what you can know. However, let me tell you that these restrictions have a very strong reason. Knowledge, even in its purest form, is nothing more than a key. As all keys do, they open doors that allow you to see and experience, and even grow beyond your wildest imaginations. But as you should know, doors work both ways. What you see on the other side often can see you too, and can often do a lot more than just see you. As such, it is vital for you to understand that learning anything from anyone can have unforeseen consequences. And even more severe are the consequences of spreading such knowledge. As such, I want your promise that you will not seek knowledge other than from me or Tom. Else you will likely end up worse than your parents and loved ones at the harbor. The words harbor visibly made 2 of the 3 children flinch, but ultimately they all nodded with determination in their eyes. Meanwhile, Tom was busy ensuring the safety of the entire group as they prepared to head out for the day. All right then, today's adventure: buying train tickets for the 8th of September. Lucian, pack some food. Fred, pack some spare clothes in case we need to change them in haste. Enjoy, get the money. And none of you will do such a thing. I will be going alone to get the tickets. Ademisal and you 3 shall remain here. I cannot trust any of you to keep your mouths shut, so stay here where it is safe. Tom interjected as a matter of fact. But it is not safe. Beyonders could already be placing curses on us. Fred whined. Tom sighed and turned to Ademisal. See. Ademisal pouted his lips in resignation. Well kids, it seems like our plans were thwarted by our own selves. No, all 3 whined, and Tom just took his hat, his money, and left the hotel room, to pick up the train tickets that the mister had told them to buy for all 5 of them, and use to travel to Backland. Of course, this message, just like most others, had been delivered via the Castic Black where the primordial unity resided. Backland, Hillston Backland, in a building with a horse stable and garden. Kilongos, who had a unique wide chin and dark green eyes, looked at the unconscious man before him. He took off the man's clothes and wore them. He then leisurely walked in front of the dressing mirror and saw the black glove on his left hand twitch. He saw many contorted lines appearing on its back. A few seconds later, Kilongos saw a thin veil of light envelop his figure. His muscles, skin, and bones began undergoing a strange transformation. Sometime later, he transformed into the unconscious man, completely identical in height, appearance, and demeanor. Sharp nose, thin eyebrows, slightly droopy cheeks, faint blue eyes. Kilongos examined himself in the mirror. He was certain that he looked no different from the unconscious man. After he rehearsed a few of the man's gestures, he bent down to drag the man off the ground and shoved him into a wardrobe. Then, he extended his right hand. With an audible snap, he broke the man's neck. Kilongos took out his handkerchief and wiped his hands before closing the wardrobe door. He slowly walked back to the mirror, wore a black double-breasted suit, tied a botic, and raised a bottle of amber-colored cologne. He dripped a few drops on his wrist, then dabbed them over himself. Kilongos tidied his hair in front of the mirror, then walked out of the room. He clasped his hands and told his butler who was waiting outside, "Don't let anyone enter my room, I'm keeping something very important in there." "Yes, Baron." The balding butler pressed his hand against his chest and bowed. "Your carriage and personal servant is waiting downstairs. Duke Negan's invitation card is there as well." Maintaining the Baron's mannerisms, Kilongos nodded indiscernibly. He walked towards the stairs in an arrogant manner under the company of his butler. Hey, a Baron who is riddled in debt, to the point of not wanting to hire a normal security guard, has actually maintained his hiring of a butler, personal male servant, 2 attendants, 2 first-grade maid servants, 4 second-grade maid servants, 2 laundry female workers, 1 carriage driver, 1 stable master, 1 gardener, 1 chef, and 1 sous chef. To these foolish nobles, dignity really is everything. I even had to waste some of my time to learn the strange pronunciations and so-called noble slang, Kilongos thought to himself in disdain. Backland, Sherwood Backland. In a particular cramped apartment, Zio Derecha sat cross-legged on a bed and looked at Fur's wall, who was reading a novel with the light from the window. These were the same two friends who accidentally deeply entrenched themselves in the dangers of this world, while trying their best to survive them. This is so disappointing. Kilongos didn't leave any clues behind. We still haven't figured out what he's trying to do in Backland. They had acted according to their initial plan and lodged a police report. Then, they secretly sent a letter to the local police station and described the strange situation at the crime scene in detail. They also mentioned that the suspect could be Kilongos. The police station responded as they had predicted. The policemen were very careful, and they transferred the case directly to the mandated punishers. After a day's time, the news that Rear Admiral Hurricane had sneaked into Backland was widely spread among all enforcement teams. Zio and Furs also left the place they originally rented and hid to investigate in secret. They didn't want to be brought back to the police station to help with the official investigation. The mandated punishers, Nighthawks, and Machinery Hivemind were all hostile towards non-official Beyonders. The churches viewed them as potential criminals. Hence, not only were Zio and Furs avoiding the possibility of Kilongos' pursuit, but they were also hiding from the enforcement authorities. If we could discover his purpose so casely, Kilongos would have been buried in a cemetery long ago, and the tombstone would be covered in weeds, Furs replied casually. We need to wait patiently. As long as the authorities continue to take this much interest in him, Kilongos will definitely make a mistake. I've got to say, I'm quite envious of a mystical item that can allow one to change appearances. Zio hugged her knees and looked out the window. I'm just worried that Kilongos will take action soon and then flee from Backland before anyone can respond. If that happens, I don't know when I'll be able to advance to Sequence 8, let alone Sequence 6 or Sequence 5. She paused and muttered as her mind spaced out, I don't know when I'll be able to take back the things that belong to our family. It's been almost a year since I last saw my younger brother. Furs gave her a comforting smile. When you fulfill your wishes, please allow me to write your experiences into a story. It would definitely be an interesting and exciting one. I actually find Miss Audrey very generous. Even if Kilongos escapes, I think she'll still reward us handsomely. We've been busying ourselves for so long after all, and we've even caused Kilongos to appear. I hope so. Sigh, why can't I have any fortuitous encounters? Zio grabbed her shoulder-length blonde hair. Furs frowned and said, in the Beyonder world, fortuitous encounters are usually accompanied with danger. I have yet to figure out what the ravings we hear during the full moon mean, or if they will result in negative changes. Heh, fortuitous encounters without dangers may exist, but they are very, very rare. It's difficult for your wish to be fulfilled, unless we receive the favors from an orthodox deity or the attention of some friendly hidden existence. However, it would be hard for us to tell if it was really an evil god or devil in disguise. Zio sat straight and drew a crimson moon on her chest. May the goddess watch over me. Duke Negan was in his mansion located in Backland, Empress Borough, where he was hosting a grand ball. There were two parts of the mansion. One was the dancing hall located on the ground floor, which was covered with glamorous stone slabs carved with complicated patterns. There was the Duke's excellent ensemble playing music in a corner. Up the stairs, there was a winding corridor that circled the hall located on the second floor. The guests were holding their glasses, leaning against the railing, overlooking the people dancing on the ground floor as though they were enjoying a fencing match from the stands. Occasionally, a gentleman would walk before a lady or his wife to invite them to dance. If the invitation was accepted, both of them would walk down the stairs hand in hand and enter the hall. On the far side of the corridor, there were door after door. They were rooms that had been allocated to the guests as their resting quarters. But behind a French door was a corridor, and on both sides of the corridor were various gypsum statues. They were all the ancestors of the Negan family. At the end of the corridor was another hall which could see the ball. Long tables were covered with a variety of delicious food and fine wine, and another ensemble belonging to the Duke was playing relaxing melodies for the guests. In the hall, the guests were gathered in groups. Some were seated and some stood around, chatting about all kinds of matters. Those who wished to get away from the frivolities for a while would go to the attached balconies to overlook the garden and enjoy the crimson moon in the sky. After participating in the opening dance, Audrey Hall stood on the second floor above the dancing hall and stared at the candles on the huge crystal chandeliers hanging from the rooftop in a daze. However, she noticed that many young men were appearing to pump themselves up to come over and invite her for a dance. So, she wisely left the place and went to the corridor that connected to the dining hall. How boring, but my attendance is necessary. Sigh, can't they just let me observe in silence? I have to say, some people have rich facial expressions when they dance. They remind me of animals seeking mates. Audrey lowered her head, looked at the tips of her feet, and walked in a straight line out of boredom. Just then, the corner of her eyes caught an approaching figure. She slowed down, stood straight, and instantly became the elegant yet quiet Miss Hall. "Good day, Baron Grimmier," Audrey greeted with a flawless smile and etiquette. Baron Grimmier had thin eyebrows and faint blue eyes. He smiled and bowed. "Nice to meet you again, Miss Hall. You are the brightest and most dazzling gemstone at this ball." After exchanging a few words, Baron Grimmier headed for the dancing hall while Audrey continued approaching the dining hall. After a few steps, she suddenly frowned. There was puzzlement in her green eyes. Baron Grimmier isn't the same as before. In the past, when he saw a pretty lady or madam of a higher rank than he was and one that was relatively prettier, he would look to the side without looking at them directly. Then, he would steal glances constantly. But today, he appears very confident. Also, his cologne smells off. In the numerous parties in the past, his body would emit the final note of the amber cologne fragrance, musky yet faint, not ostentatious yet elegant. In other words, he would spray the cologne a few hours earlier to let the front and middle notes disperse before the gathering. But just now, his cologne was amber in a middle note, rich and refined. Audrey slowed down her footsteps. As a spectator who had completely digested her potion, her sensitivity towards details wasn't anything other beyonders could compare to. Suddenly, she thought of a possibility. Her green crystal clear eyes froze. It couldn't be Kilongos in Discus, right? The creeping hunger has the power to change a person's appearance. The more Audrey thought about it, the more possible it seemed. She felt uptight as she turned nervous and panicky. If he really was Rear Admiral Hurricane, what is he trying to do? It's a pity that I can't bring Susie to the ball. Otherwise, I could ask her to observe Baron Grimmier. No way, I have to warn father. Amidst her frantic thoughts, Audrey quickened her pace and entered the dining hall. She found Count Hall, who was talking to the chief cabinet secretary and others. She flashed a flawless smile and walked over. She held Count Hall by his arm and told the others, "Gentlemen, do you mind if I borrow Count Hall for a few minutes?" "Beautiful lady, it's your right," the few gentlemen said in a friendly response. Audrey held Count Hall by his arm and moved to the nearest balcony. They found a quiet, uninhabited corner, and she said to her middle-aged father, who was getting plump, "Father, I have something to tell you." Count Hall was smiling fondly at his daughter, but he got serious when he saw her serious facial expression. "What's the matter?" "I ran into Baron Grimmier earlier, but there are things about him that are different from the past. For instance, his cologne was in the middle note of the amber fragrance. It used to be the end note. And," Audrey continued with the things that she found different, "it could be explained as being sensitive and meticulous." After she described what she had noticed, she weighed her words and added, "I heard from Viscount Glaint that Rear Admiral Hurricane Kilongos has the ability to take on other people's appearance. Hasn't he been in Backland recently?" Count Hall listened to her carefully, and his face grew abnormally grave. But he soon flashed a smile and comforted his anxious daughter. "I'll take care of this. Go look for your mother and stay with her. She's at the lounge in this hall." "Okay." Audrey nodded obediently. On the way back to the lounge, she turned around and looked at her father. She saw that Count Hall was talking to another noble softly, and he wore a rather solemn look. Audrey couldn't help but feel anxious. She felt that she needed to do something to make sure that her father, mother, and brother didn't get hurt. She surveyed the area and changed the direction in which she was heading in. She left the dining hall and found Duke Negan's small prayer room. She pushed the door closed and locked it behind her. She looked at the symbol of the Lord of Storms before her and subconsciously found a remote and dark corner. Audrey sat down with her body leaning forward. She clasped her hands together into a praying position and supported her forehead. Then, she recited softly in Hermes, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era, you are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, you are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck." Max knew that this incident was happening as he had confirmed the events would be following the original plot to an extent due to the interventions of many powerful beings, and forces that perhaps he did not even know about, and would likely prefer that he remained unaware of them. As such, he had just ensured that Tom, Ademisal and the 3 other kids would have a way to leave Tingen as soon as he completed his advancement ritual, thus avoiding the screening of the official Beyonders that would ensure not too long after the incident occurred. Max looked up at the night sky and wondered, will I truly be able to reach the realm of those beings, or will I be forgotten in the sands of time as just another Beyonder? Perhaps, I might reach that realm of power one day, but I might not remain me. Well, the current me that is the amalgamation of Max, Samuel, and the pitiable Unity, might be forced to fuse with other things like Klein had to do, to face off against a certain worm, or I might be directly corrupted by something or trapped somewhere forever. Shaking his head to get rid of the negative thoughts that were now beginning to affect him even in independence, Max quickly entered the amalgamation of all and used its energy to purge himself of external influences, regaining clarity of mind. It seems whoever or whatever is doing this, found its way here. Maybe I cannot put all my hopes on a single planet that basically has no protection against outside influences. Once I recruit enough priests who can access the church's headquarters, I can leave this world and treat it like a simulation game where I just give orders through my Unity persona and watch as the orders are carried out to grow my faith and create more anchors. Plus, with their God physically present for all priests, their beliefs would not waver with time like in other religions where the gods are beings who do not often communicate with mortals. Considering I would be able to see through the emotions and intents of those who come to the headquarters, there would be no such thing as betrayal or corruption. That way, I should be able to focus on creating churches on other habitable worlds to reduce the risk of a random omniscient being choosing to obliterate the planet with all my anchors, making me lose control instantly in the higher sequences. Long chapter because a lot of copied from the source material, and I tend to want to have enough of my own writing in there to compensate for a copied aspect. September 9th. Just as Max had predicted, everything followed the same course as the original novel he had read a long time ago. Ms. Justice prayed to the fool, Klein, who accepted the prayer and conjured a perfect replica of the scene of her praying to him and sent it to Alger, who had been wanting to locate Kilongos, the rear admiral turned pirate, for quite a while. Kilongos himself had come to Duke Negan's party only for one reason, to assassinate him, a mission given to him by a certain Beyonder organization. To complete this, he had the creeping hunger with him, an incredibly powerful sealed artifact of the Shepherd Pathway. Unfortunately for him, because of Audrey's timely advice to her father, who gave the same advice to Duke Negan, the latter was prepared for Kilongos and launched an ambush on him instead. Duke Negan's plump figure stood erect on the spot and observed the incoming assassin as if he were looking down on him. He lifted his right hand and pushed forward. He murmured in ancient Hermes, "Imprison." In silence, Kilongos suddenly stopped. He was suddenly surrounded by a transparent wall, something that wrapped around him like a sticky liquid. It made him seem like an insect in amber or a prisoner in prison. The leader of the Conservative Party nobles, the hereditary Duke Pallas Negan, was a Beyonder himself, a very strong Beyonder. Duke Negan spoke in a low voice again and waved his right hand. Flog, pa, pa. Kilongos seemed to be whipped by a shapeless whip. His clothing was torn from the whipping and his skin was lacerated, revealing white bone. Then, Duke Negan leaned forward and held his right first. He declared in an imposing manner, "Death, pal." His arm waved as his entire body slammed into Kilongos' head with numerous afterimages. His fist had struck his target's head in an unavoidable manner. Kacha. Kilongos' head shattered, but the surroundings shattered as well. Duke Negan remained standing at his original spot. It was just a dream. It was unknown when the pirate admiral had already switched his ability and entered the nightmare state. Unlike an ordinary nightmare, he could still move his body after he dragged people into a dream. Kilongos stealthily appeared behind Duke Negan, and his cold gaze locked onto the Duke. Wrapped with high-speed spiraling winds, his right fist stabbed into the target's vest like a sharp blade. Whoosh! Amidst the howling of the wind, Kilongos' right fist punched straight through Duke Negan's body and through his heart. But Duke Negan's figure rapidly turned transparent, just like a soul that was summoned. After the nearly formless figure dissipated, Duke Negan appeared before the French door on the other side of the winding corridor. He wore a scrutinizing smile. Another Beyonder. Are they prepared ahead of time to lay an ambush for me? How is that possible? Although Kilongos was unwilling to accept this fact, he dealt with it calmly. The glove on his left hand squirmed and took on the form of dark golden scales. His irises grew pale and became vertical. Then, A shapeless wave swept from every direction. Ladies and gentlemen were thrown into a state of uncontrollable fear at the same time. They left their hiding places and ran around aimlessly. The scene became chaotic. The Beyonders didn't dare to act recklessly as they were worried they might hurt their relatives and friends. Seizing the opportunity, Kilongos ran quickly as hurricanes whirled around him. He smashed through one of the resting room doors before smashing through an oriel window. Amidst the shattering sound, he leapt outside and flew a distance away from Duke Negan's mansion with the aid of the wind. The moment he landed, Kilongos immediately ran towards a forest ahead of him. It was a municipal garden, an escape route he had scouted out a while ago. Once he shook off his pursuers, he could change his appearance and blend into the massive population of Backland of more than 5 million people. That was also the reason why he dared to accept such a difficult mission. After a while, there was a gale blowing towards Duke Negan's mansion. The Cardinal of the Church of the Lord of Storms, the Archbishop of Backland, Spellsinger of God, and Ace Snake brought a few mandated punishers and flew towards the mansion. He couldn't inform the other Beyonders in time. Alger was one of the members who arrived with Archbishop Ace. However, he was in a bad mood because he saw the broken windows and the other Beyonders running out of the mansion. It meant that Rear Admiral Hurricane Kilongos had escaped. The rest of the story continued just as it had happened previously, with Kilongos successfully escaping, only to run into Mr. Isaac Eggers, who ultimately kills him, filling out the last page in Kilongos' book. After that, the death console of the death pathway, Isaac Eggers took the sealed artifact called Creeping Hunger from his hand, and left the scene before the official Beyonders arrived. Max leaned back on the throne in Castle Black, his projection made from the unity energy within the Church of the Primordial Unity. Headquarters also leaned back, following his movements. Though he could make them move independently to his own consciousness here, it would take up a lot more mental capacity to do so, resulting in his thinking speed being greatly reduced. Instead, Max could either make them move together, or just freeze one or both of them while not needing to communicate directly with the humans inside either structure. After all, both structures were within the amalgamation of all. Max closed his eyes and felt the creation of 30 connections with a faraway location in deep space. This connection was the one he had with the villagers in Independence, the people he had just saved from the monster boar. Of the 30, 3 were from the hunters whose loved ones were not killed in the attack, effectively saved by him. 1 was from the hunter who had basically lost everyone dear to him and was still being consoled by Max personally, while the rest were from many of the villagers. In total, there were barely any people in the village who were no longer a believer in unity, at the very least one who believed in him on the surface. Max had spread a doctrine he created among the people of the village, which was actually rather simple with very few restrictions. Unlike fully developed religions like the churches on Earth, or even the religions back on Samuel's Earth, Max's current religion was in its infancy. In fact, it would be more apt to call it in its conceptual stage at the moment, with under 40 believers including the ones back on Earth. His current religion only involved praying to the primordial unity when waking up, when sleeping, and when eating food. A simple, "Thank you Lord for the food," or, "Forgive me for anything wrong one have done today, Lord," was enough for him. Of course, he had shown the image of the primordial unity, which was also the shape that the amalgamation of all was in. He mentioned that compared to the words they used, the image of the primordial unity as well as the intent they wished to convey was a lot more important, which was actually true even for some of the Beyonder churches on Earth. "I should prepare now, for my advancement," Max noted to himself as he exited the amalgamation of all, not before leaving a note for Tom and a demisol and returning to his body that was sleeping on the bed in his temporary house. He got out of bed, stretched a bit and began with his preparations for the 9th of September, the day when things went from 0 to 100 in just a few moments, and also the day when he would advance to Sequence 8. Don't look. September 9, 1349 of the 5th epoch. Klein and his colleague in the Nighthawks, Leonard Mitchell, who is parasitized by a considerably friendly and benevolent spirit of Pallas Zoroast, found a letter written by Lenevis. Lenevis was a Beyonder whom not just the Nighthawks, but the other official Beyonder organization in Tingen had also been trying to locate and apprehend for a long time now, as he was already responsible for a considerable number of crimes and a very long list of dead bodies. Ha ha ha, congratulations. Congratulations on finally finding this letter. This means that you're not too stupid, nor too slow, you qualify to take part in this game of life and death that I've designed. Child laborers that die before their time. Factory workers seldom live past 10 years after entering the factory because of their working conditions. Female workers who risk severe illnesses for a meager salary. I see boundless resentment surrounding every factory, turning the surroundings oppressive and gloomy. This is the worst of times, and also the best of times. Our game shall take place under such a setting. Fools, prepare yourselves, I'm going to issue you a hint. Klein and Leonard lifted their gaze from the letter and exchanged glances. They muttered, he's crazy, right? Lenevis is secretly a lunatic. A lunatic who truly has a delusional disorder and an antisocial personality, Klein thought, and felt a tug at his heartstrings. He quickly redirected his gaze to the letter. Ladies and gentlemen, the hint is that I've placed a bomb in Tingen, a bomb that will grow stronger over time. Seek it and finish it before it explodes. If you lose the game, there will be a boom, and the entire city of Tingen will be reduced to ruin. Trust me, I'm not lying at all about this. Lenevis, who enjoys giving his friends pleasant surprises. A bomb. Klein looked at Leonard and muttered to himself, perplexed. Leonard held the letter up to the sunlight and looked as he flipped it around. He didn't find any other clues. The term, bomb, is probably an expression. I've never heard of a bomb that can grow stronger. Klein creased his eyebrows and said thoughtfully, no, I mean, he might be using bomb to reference something in mysticism. Such as an evil ritual that continuously accumulates power. Leonard cocked his head as though he was listening to something when suddenly, his facial expression grew solemn. He nodded as his green eyes constricted. Maybe you're right, isn't there a description at the beginning of the letter? Child laborers die before their time, factory workers who seldom live past 10 years after entering the factory because of their working conditions, and female workers who risk severe illnesses for a meager salary. Boundless resentment surrounds every factory. Perhaps, that might be the energy source that constantly strengthens Lenevis's bomb. Yes, that's very possible. Klein suddenly tensed up and said, we need to report to the captain. Immediately. Leonard laughed and said, there's no need to be so nervous. You should know that Lenevis is a swindler. The part where he said that he didn't lie might be a lie itself. Of course, regardless, we have to return to Zudaland Street to report to the captain. It's best if we can request the Holy Cathedral to send a mysticism expert over and find the location of the altar through the abnormal accumulation of resentment. Someone is apparently very familiar with protocol. But why would the setup of such an altar need Hood Eugen's help? What role does a psychiatrist play in this? Klein didn't object to the idea. He left 62 Howe Street with Leonard and rushed back to Zudaland Street on a hired carriage. On Zudaland Street, as the carriage stopped in front of the Blackthorn Security Company and two gentlemen in rather disheveled clothing got off, another younger man was observing the scene from the side in an alley hidden in darkness. He was wearing a gray cloak over his normal-looking clothes. He had silver hair, but the dirt and grime on it reduced it to a dull gray tone. He had bright red eyes that would immediately remind any Beyonders, with considerable knowledge about the Beyonder Circle, of a certain family of vampire-like Beyonders. A faded scar could still be casily seen on his right cyclid, but thankfully it had left the eye itself untouched. Most importantly, almost all of his focus was on the glass door that led inside the Blackthorn Security Company. He had long since scouted this position to be the optimal location to observe the interior without being easily seen from by those inside. In his hand was a glass test tube with a substance that was rapidly changing forms and colors. One moment it was a liquid, and the next a gas, before returning to a liquid state. Its color was also constantly changing multiple colors, before suddenly turning black or white at random moments, and then returning to the chaotic mess of random color changes. Just as they entered the Blackthorn Security Company's door, Klein saw two familiar faces, one voluptuous and one scrawny. They were Maynard's wife and sister. They were still in black dresses and black hats. The fine checkered black gauze concealed their faces. The two ladies were chatting with Roseanne, and when they suddenly saw Klein's return, they turned around and walked forward. You really are the cream of the crop in this industry. Mrs. Maynard nodded slightly and said in a low voice, I'm very pleased with the outcome and am also impressed with your work approach. Here's the reward that you deserve. The scrawny woman passed a light brown paper bag to Klein. It was filled with thick stacks of cash. There were 10-pound notes, 5-pound notes, 1-pound notes, and also 5 soldi and 1 soldi. It's a total of 230 pounds, the scrawny lady stated simply. Klein was in no mood to pay any attention to the money. He passed it to Roseanne and said, take this to Mrs. Oriana. I doubt the two respectable women would make a mistake counting the money. At that moment, the corner of his eyes caught the Tingan City Honest paper in Mrs. Maynard's hands. On the most eye-catching spot on the front page, there were two pieces of news. Old Baron's widow dies in involvement with MP Maynard's murder. Mayor Dennis takes the blame for the worsening public security in Tingan for the past 3 months and resigns. So that's the official excuse for Madame Sharon's case. I've yet to read the newspaper today. Klein nodded at the two ladies and followed Leonard through the partition to the captain's office. Max did not recognize these two ladies, but from his memories of this scene, they must have been the people who had commissioned the Blackthorn Security Company to investigate Madame Sharon, who may have been involved in the death of MP Maynard. How was it? Did you find any clues? Dunsmith closed his document, lifted his head, and looked at Klein and Leonard with his deep gray eyes. We found a letter that was left behind by Lenevis. Leonard didn't provide any further descriptions and simply passed the captain the letter filled with madness and provocation. Dunn opened the letter and scanned through it quickly. He rubbed his temples as he said, "He really is a lunatic. He's only a sequence 8, sequence 7 at most." Klein agreed from the bottom of his heart. Lenevis is a dangerous figure who can damage the stability of social order. Even though he's weak, we can't belittle him. Then, he told Captain about his and Leonard's assumption. Dunn touched his receding hairline as he said, "That was my thought as well. I'll immediately send a telegram to the Holy Cathedral and ask them to send a mysticism expert over for assistance. Who knows how dangerous Lenevis's bomb could be? We have to be extremely careful. When the Holy Cathedral replies to me, I'll arrange for the follow-up." Klein and Leonard exchanged glances and nodded simultaneously as they said, "All right." Seizing the moment when Captain was sending a telegram to the Holy Cathedral, Klein returned to the reception hall to grab a copy of the Tingan City Honest paper from Roseanne. He stood at the partition and read the two articles with full concentration. The widow of the old baron of the Coy family, Madame Sharon, was suspected to be involved in the sudden death of Member of Parliament Maynard. The police received a tip and took action at night. They discovered that Madame Sharon and her accomplice had knocked out her servants to carry on a pagan ceremony in her bedroom. They refused to surrender and attempted to resist arrest, resulting in the death of a heroic police officer. Finally, Madame Sharon and her accomplice paid the price for their evil deeds with their lives. Mayor Dennis takes the blame for the worsening public security in Tingan and resigns. He also announced that he wouldn't be running for re-election next year. For the next few months, Deputy Mayor Mr. Harry will take on the responsibilities of mayor. A heroic police officer, is that the description of Kenley? Klein sighed and knew that it was the best way of handling the situation. According to the internal rules of the Nighthawks, in order to prevent the forces of evil from taking revenge on their family members, their names would be kept confidential even if they sacrificed their lives. He folded the newspaper quietly and returned it to the reception desk. Klein suddenly saw a visitor who walked through the entrance. Max also noticed her entering but completely avoided looking at her actual body, and instead only observed through her shadow on the street. He knew the backlash from the true God would only reach him if he activated his spirit vision, but it was better to be safe in this situation. After all, his entire future depended on how he progressed and survived this single day. She was a young lady, in her 20s at most. She was in a ruffled hat and loose dress. She had lovely facial features, blonde hair, green eyes, and also a depressed yet silent temperament. She was quite a beauty. The most eye-catching thing about her was her stomach that bulged out. She looked like she was more than 7 months pregnant. Klein was stunned, and he felt that he had seen the young pregnant lady before. Suddenly, he heard Leonard say in surprise, "Miss Megos." Megos, yes, the young lady who was conned by Lenevis. She's pregnant with Lenevis's child, and as such, there might be something wrong with her mental health. She says her child sings in her stomach and also whistles. Klein was suddenly enlightened and he wasn't surprised that Leonard knew Megos. When they relaunched the investigations of people related to Lenevis, the lady's photo had been seen by every Nighthawk. Klein knew her even earlier. Her Aunt Christina, whose savings had been conned by Lenevis, had brought her to the divination club to ask for help. Her aunt even asked if the child in her stomach could be used for divination. Then, as Megos heard Leonard's voice, she looked over at the both of them vacantly and replied politely, "Hello. Miss Megos, what brings you here to the Blackthorn Security Company? Do you have anything that you'd like us to do for you?" Klein took 2 steps forward and asked. He was very confused by Megos' sudden visit. He felt it was an extreme coincidence. "We just found Lenevis's letter, and Megos comes visiting." Megos touched her stomach and smiled faintly. Somehow or other, I suddenly thought of coming to Zootaland Street and suddenly thought of coming up to take a look. Her mental health seems to have worsened. Klein recalled that he hadn't managed to activate his spirit vision and check on Megos' situation previously. Hence, he lifted his teeth and was about to tap his left molars. Just then, a series of thoughts screamed through his head in increasing intensity. Don't look, don't look, don't look, you'll die if you look, you'll die if you look. Klein stood rooted on the spot like a statue as his forehead was covered in a cold sweat. It was like having a deep and heavy nightmare that he nearly couldn't wake up from. Suddenly, he understood something. He had failed to activate his spirit vision the last time because his spirituality had noticed an unimaginable danger. It slowed him down subconsciously, so he missed the opportunity and forgot the follow-up. At that point, Klein had yet to digest the seer potion entirely, and he had yet to advance to sequence 8, so the warnings of spirituality were very subtle and difficult to notice. But now, Clown's spiritual foresight was so clear and obvious. After nearly 20 seconds, Klein finally shook off his paralysis. He looked sideways at Leonard and realized that the Midnight Pact was also covered in cold sweat, and his eyes were filled with horror. Suddenly, Klein understood what the bomb Lenevis was referring to. It's the baby in Megos' stomach. It's the baby that he left behind. Klein suddenly associated the description in the letter with Hood Eugen's answers, and he suddenly remembered something that he had read in Emperor Rassel's diary. I started the Industrial Revolution with my own hands and personally ushered in the age of steam and machinery, but this will only become the hotbed for the descent of an evil god upon this world. Klein's pupils constricted as he thought of a possibility that he instinctually refused to admit. No, that's not right. The baby in Megos' stomach can't be the son of some evil god or an evil god waiting to descend upon the world. No, why would Hood Eugen do such a silly thing? Although his psychiatrist power can help Lenevis fool Megos and use her as a spawning vessel in her semi-unconscious state, no. The resentment of child laborers who die before their time and the factory workers and female workers who live less than 10 years aren't helping the son of an evil god to grow rapidly. No, why you may not look directly at God. The thought crossed Klein's mind in rapid succession and reached a final deduction. Back in the alley, Max was not in any better state compared to Klein. In fact, it could even be considered that his situation was worse, a lot worse. His body was not moving, and 2 slender and unblemished fingers were extended towards his slightly trembling red eyes. The owner of the hand was a young man in stature, but a mature adult, from his face. He wore a simple yet elegant white cloak, with golden hair and a beard. He had a silver cross on his neck, just like any ordinary priest. It was Adam, the angel of imagination, and he looked no different than the previous times he had haunted Max, like an unrelenting ghost, or a crazy ex, or an IRS agent. FCK-AN, and so it begins. Adam and chills. Max did not think about the positive side of the situation, as in case the angel had found a way to read his thoughts, all his plans would be exposed. Instead, they cleared out his mind almost completely, letting the Unity energy controlled by the combined souls of Samuel, Max, and Unity itself to move his body. This way, he was not actually thinking of anything while performing everything according to his plan. I can explain. Quote. Explain what? Why you are here at the most crucial part of my plans. Or why and how you have been leaving the planet and returning without being obliterated by them. I can explain everything. But most importantly, killing me will only ruin more of your plans. Instead, letting me live will increase the chances of your plan succeeding. Look, I have no interest in the pathways that are joined with yours. But I really need to see what happens here. And I am indeed that desperate. Enough to call out to him. Max said as his eyes clanked at the monocle in his breast pocket, slightly sticking out such that Adam could see it, despite the gray cloak. Desperate enough to call to her. He said as he looked over at the red moon that was Samcho rising on the horizon despite night not being anywhere nearby. Look man, I know you like everything going according to your plan. But killing me will only make things worse. How about we continue what we have been doing until now? You know, maintain the status quo. Adam ignored the threat about the monocle. However, when Max glanced at the red moon, his innocent eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Suddenly, Max could move again. And Adam retracted his fingers that were only millimeters from his eyes. Max saw that Adam's apparent frown had a tinge of a smirk mixed in, as though he was watching something incredibly amusing. Did he just smile, and not in the hiding you emotions kind of smile? Max mused for a moment. Interesting. You have chosen to take her support. Of all the beings you could ask help from, you chose her. Perhaps that is why you survived out there. It matters not, for you have formed a connection with an important character. No, I refuse, and even if you try, you will fail just like you have been until now. Max knew that Adam had been trying to pull Max into his plot for his advancement ritual. And he refused to be part of something like that, having his life manipulated at the whims of an insanely strong king of angels, like Klein, but without a certain true God looking over him and protecting him constantly. Plus, he did not have the plot armor that Klein had. In exchange though, I have a super strong outer God, an ex-pillar at that, as my backer, of some sort at least. Without much of a warning, Adam vanished with the usual, "We shall sec." The line Sancho reminded Samuel of the notoriously unsuccessful Team Rocket from back on Earth. Still untouched by a demisol, no contact as of yet, no contact for the past 1 month or so. It should be fine, right? Meanwhile in the Blackthorn Security Company, Klein instinctively reached for his pockets. He held the flaring sun charm in one hand and Azek's copper whistle in the other. He acutely noticed that the cold, gentle Beander feedback of the latter had vanished as if it was being suppressed by an invisible power. However, the former was still warm and comforting. Making use of this comforting feeling, Klein entered a half-cogitation state. He blocked out his feelings of worry and didn't leave anything to chance. He turned and shot a look at Leonard Mitchell, then tipped his chin toward Megos. He then controlled his expression with his clown abilities and smiled at Megos. "Do you want coffee, black tea, or nothing at all?" Megos stroked her stomach as if she was listening to something. "A cup of warm water. I suddenly thought of chatting with you guys about Lansvis. I have the feeling that you know a lot." "Who told you that?" Leonard was no longer the frivolous guy that he usually was. His smile had turned rather stiff. Megos suddenly giggled. "My child told me. He knows a lot. He's very smart." Klein fought back the urge to curse. He turned to the partition and signaled to Leonard to keep Megos calm. Leonard forced a smile and pointed toward the sofa. "That's exactly what I'd like to talk about. We want to have a chat with you about Lenevis." Behind the receptionist's desk, Roseanne looked on in confusion. She suddenly realized that she didn't need to do anything. Klein quickly made his way past the partition and directly pushed open the door to Dunn Smith's office, then closed the door with a bang. He saw Dunn looking shocked before turning serious and saying in a heavy voice, "Captain, something serious has happened." "I know what Lenevis meant by a bomb." Dunn stood up and pointed outside. "Megos." He had obviously heard Leonard's shocked exclamation, but he was unable to see the looks of fear and cold sweat on his teammates' faces. Klein nodded and explained quickly, "I tried to activate my spirit vision to observe Megos to ascertain her mental condition, but my spirituality stopped me from making the attempt. It kept warning me not to look, that I would die if I did so. This made me recall a saying, 'You may not look directly at God.' Even if the Factus in Megos' stomach isn't an evil god attempting to descend upon this world, or the spawn of an evil god, it's definitely a legendary creature. Captain, connecting this to the Black Altar in Hood Eugen's memories, to his psychiatrist abilities, to the tragic world as described in Lenevis's letter, I think that my guess is quite close to the truth. Lenevis obtained a ritualistic magic linked to the true creator from an Aurora Order member. With Hood Eugen's help, he turned Megos into a vessel to gestate a certain power. Then, this power will make use of the resentment, oppression, and gloominess surrounding the factories to quickly grow until maturity. In other words, the ritual itself needs this resentment, oppression, and gloominess in order to succeed." Dunn considered Klein's words seriously for nearly 20 seconds before nodding with a solemn expression. "I'll ask for assistance from the Holy Cathedral immediately. Let's hope that the baby in Megos' stomach can still wait. Of course, we can't just sit back and do nothing. Tell Leonard to keep Megos calm and keep her company. Notify Mrs. Oriana, Roseanne, and the rest. Get all the non-combatants to evacuate. I'll head to the back of Channy's gate after I send the telegram. We have to prepare for the worst, which is if Megos' baby is born before the arrival of reinforcements from the Holy Cathedral. As captain of the Tingen Nighthawks, I have the authority to use Saint Selena's ashes during emergencies. Saint Selena's ashes, the ashes of a high-sequence Beander, the core seals within Channy's gate." Klein's worries eased a little. He quickly thought of other things. "Captain, we can also ask for reinforcements from the mandated Punishers and the Machinery Hivemind, they should have similar holy items." Klein suddenly had a stroke of inspiration as he muttered to himself, Lenevis's case was originally under the purview of the mandated punishers. Old Neil and I were there to help when one of their senior members lost control. As he spoke softly, his voice grew to a crescendo. Captain, can you ask the mandated punishers if the member who lost control was tracking or keeping Megos under surveillance? Are you suspecting that he lost control because he got corrupted by the baby in Megos' stomach? They were responsible for Megos when the investigation was happening, Dunn answered seriously. We cannot delay any further. Go to Mrs. Oriana and the rest. I'll take this time to send a telegram to first ask for assistance from the Holy Cathedral, then I'll inform the mandated punishers and the machinery hivemind. Yes, I'll also have to send a telegram to the police department and see if they can come up with an excuse to evacuate the citizens nearby. All right, Klein had taken a few steps out of the room when he suddenly recalled something. He thought about the coincidence of Megos' sudden visit. The image of the building with the red chimney appeared in his mind. He turned around quickly and said to Dunn, Captain, one more thing. Do you remember the coincidences I told you about? The clue to the Antigonus family's notebook in the house opposite the kidnapping, Ray Bieber who didn't make it out of Tingen in time, Hannes Vincent exposing himself because of a coincidence, and how a member of the Aurora Order lost his life because he chanced upon me, etc. All these coincidences are very subtle and hard to detect, but the fact that Megos suddenly came looking for us right after we discovered Lenevis's letter is too obvious and direct. This coincidence was already laid bare before us, it's no longer hidden. I think that the person behind this will soon take center stage. Also, why would Madame Sharon take the risk of killing Member of Parliament Maynard? Is this also a coincidence? Dunn thought about it and gave a solemn reply, I'll include this point in the telegram. Klein didn't waste any more time. He exited the office and went straight for the accountant's room on the opposite side. While doing so, he recalled the warning given by Mr. Death regarding the fool's follower, which as it turned out, was him in this case. He also recalled the words of Mr. Azek. It felt like all the puzzle pieces were coming together slowly, but there was one crucial piece that was stopping him from seeing the whole picture clearly, and that one piece was the mastermind behind everything. Who was it truly? Mrs. Oriana was preparing the budget for the last 3 months of the year. She wanted to complete it in advance just in case the captain forgot about it again. When she saw Klein enter, she greeted him with a smile. Lad, what claims do you have to submit today? Klein exhaled, Mrs. Oriana, we will be on vacation today. Go back home immediately. Oriana froze for a while, looking at the serious face before her in a daze. A few seconds later, she stood up in a fluster. All right, Klein added in a hurry, help me inform the rest of the clerks in the office and the armory. I'll inform Roseanne. Yes, Oriana didn't even pack. She grabbed her handbag and hurried out of the accounting office. She turned and stared at Klein after entering the corridor. She drew a crimson moon near her chest and said, all of you will be blessed by the goddess. Thank you, Klein replied in his heart. He made his way past the partition into the receptionist area only to see Leonard chatting with Megos about Lenevis, his expression rigid. Klein leaned toward Roseanne as he filled up a cup of warm water. He then whispered, go home, it's dangerous here. Come back tomorrow. Roseanne opened her mouth in shock but closed it again after seeing Klein's stern expression. She lowered her head and packed for about 10 seconds before picking up her bag and leaving the receptionist area. Just as she was walking past Klein, she bit her lip and whispered, to be honest, I respect the Nighthawks as much as I hate other people who become Beyonders. After seeing the clerks evacuate the Blackthorn Security Company, Klein brought warm water to Megos, bent his back, and placed it on the table in front of her. I have something to settle, I'll be back soon. As he stood up, he took the opportunity to lean in towards Leonard's ear and whispered, keep her here. Leonard clenched his teeth and widened his mouth into a grin. He continued his conversation with Megos and noticed that Megos was getting a little restless, as though she was losing her focus. Outside the company, Max also noticed this, and his heartbeat sped up. It was finally happening. This was one of the first scenes in the novel that horrified him. Even the descriptions of some truly gruesome scenes like exploded body parts did not affect him mentally as much as this single scene that was about to happen. Literal chills, every time. Les Miserables. Klein returned to the captain's office, only to realize that Dunn had already gone underground. There was a telegram on the table. It was the reply from the mandated punishers. Yes, we will be there immediately. Yes, The mandated Punisher did lose control because of Megos. Klein couldn't calm himself down as he made his way to the corridor. He didn't know if he was waiting for the captain to retrieve the holy ashes or for reinforcements to arrive. I wonder if high-sequence Beyonders can teleport. I don't think so. He paced around a few times, suddenly feeling peaceful. He saw that the gas lamps on both sides of the corridor were now dyed a faint blue. Amid the darkness, Dunn followed the stairs into the corridor. In his palm was a square, palm-sized box of ashes. This box looked as though it was made out of pure silver, but it also felt like it was human bones. It was carved with many mysterious patterns. Klein felt colder the closer he was to the box. It was as if the cold was rapidly seeping into his blood. Dunn's face was bathed in an icy blue light. He told Klein, "Go to Channy's Gate and pick out a scaled artifact with the highest offensive ability. Decide exactly which one with your own judgment. I've already told Sika and the keepers inside. Take note of the hidden threats. Of those, there are 3 grade 2 sealed artifacts, which are... Oh, now that I've taken out the ashes of Saint Selena, Sika and the keepers cannot leave their positions now." At this point, Fry and Royale were both at Kenley's house for the funeral preparations. The Archbishop at St. Selena Cathedral had gone to the countryside to preach. All right, Klein didn't hesitate, immediately turning towards the basement. When he was nearing the intersection, Klein suddenly stopped. He knew that most of the sealed artifacts behind Channy's Gate at Tingen City were grade 3 and wouldn't have much of an effect on the baby in Megos' stomach. It was, at the very least, a legendary creature. The mutated Sun Sacred Emblem might work, but it takes too long to have an effect. It's unsuitable for this. There are only 3 grade 2 sealed artifacts in Tingen City, and they're all very dangerous artifacts that can easily result in my death. I estimate their powers to be about the same as my Flaring Sun Charm, so I cannot have too many reservations later. I'll use the Flaring Sun Charm without any hesitation. It would definitely be as powerful as a grade 2 sealed artifact. After all, it has the power of divine blood in it. Klein's mind whirled as he nodded indiscernibly. He felt for the Flaring Sun Charm and Azek's copper whistle in his pocket, but he was surprised to find that the sensation of the latter was back. Regardless of whether it was useful or not, Klein took out a pen and paper set that was used for divination and wrote a short message. "The person who made my fate disharmonious and stole the skull of your child has appeared. He has arranged for Megos to enter the Blackthorn Security Company at 36 Zudaland Street. It's highly likely that Megos is harboring the son of an evil god. The situation is very urgent." He put away his pen and folded the piece of paper. Klein took out the copper whistle at the intersection in blue, then watched the giant skeleton messenger appear before him. In the corridor within the deep and serene basement, the nearly 4-meter-tall bone messenger disappeared before Klein's eyes after taking the letter. When all that was left of the surroundings were the classic gas lamps embedded in the walls, he put away Azek's copper whistle and walked towards Channy's Gate. As he was writing the letter, he had already decided on which sealed artifact to pick. Firstly, it would be almost impossible for the grade 3 sealed artifacts to have any effect on the baby in Megos' stomach. Unless it was an item like the mutated Sun Sacred Emblem which had hidden powers. But, at that very moment, in such a situation, Klein wasn't in the mood to explore or research a secret that might or might not exist. Plus, most scaled artifacts would carry a certain level of danger for the user. So, Klein eliminated the grade 3 sealed artifacts that would weaken the user without affecting the enemy. Secondly, the Tingen Nighthawks didn't have any grade 1 sealed artifacts and only 3 grade 2 artifacts. That was originally a secret that Klein wasn't allowed to know, but due to the urgency of the situation, Dunn made use of an emergency clause and told him the general situation. Dunn Smith couldn't hold any other sealed artifacts at the same time while holding St. Selena's ashes. And behind Tingen City's Channy's Gate, there were 3 grade 2 sealed artifacts, 2030, 2078, and 2-105. Ultimately, he had to choose between 2030, Ink X Houstable Poison, 2078, Door of Death and 2-105, Blood Vessel Thief. After a deep thought while he was writing the letter to Mr. Azek, Klein decided to go with sealed artifact 2-105. It looked like a thick, stiffened blood vessel. Anyone who touched it, regardless of whether they were protected or not, would have their life stolen. In the beginning, it wouldn't be obvious. But, if one didn't break contact with it, the effects would be visible half an hour later. Dunn had said that a Sequence 5 heretic held onto it for 2 hours. He turned from a brawny man in his 30s into a hunched old man who had loose skin, thin white hair, and missing teeth. The most important trait of 2 to 105 was that the person wearing it would have the chance to steal an ability from a target within a specific range. Even high-sequence Beyonders could be robbed of their abilities, but the probability was smaller. Within a 10-minute time period, the person who was robbed would lose the corresponding ability while the person who wore the item would be able to use the ability skillfully. 10 minutes later, the ability would vanish, and the person who was robbed would need to wait a couple of days to recover. Regardless of whether it works or not, it will at least raise the probability of success from 5% to 10%. I'm the king of yellow and black who wields good luck, after all. Besides, our main goal is just to take precautions and make preparations to deal with the worst-case scenario. We won't necessarily have to take action. Hopefully, reinforcements will arrive soon. Klein stopped outside the duty room, showing no signs of hesitation anymore. About the negative effects of sealed artifact 2 to 105, he wasn't worried because he wasn't planning to use the artifact himself. His plan was to give it to Leonard, as he already had the flaring sun charm and Azek's copper whistle, who he had no idea if it would still be suppressed. My dear poet, it's time for you to show your true secret, Klein muttered and saw Sekatron standing by the duty room. With her white hair and black eyes, the part-time author remained silent for a few seconds before saying, "Why don't you guard Channy's gate? I'm stronger and more experienced than you. But you don't have flaring sun charms," Klein replied with a smile. "Madam, I'm already a sequence 8. It wouldn't be safe here either. There are many sealed artifacts that possess living traits that are itching to take action. Well, if we fail, the people here will definitely not survive. Heh, our goal upstairs is to buy time and wait for reinforcements. It might be safer than being around Channy's gate." Sekatron puckered her lips slowly and drew a crimson moon on her chest. "May the goddess bless all of you." As Dunn didn't have the time to write the document in time, Klein couldn't enter Channy's gate directly. All he did was watch Sekatron push open a tiny crack and enter. After a few minutes, she appeared by the door, and she was holding a thick, blood-tainted, pale blood vessel in her left hand. Klein extended his hand to take it, and he immediately felt a faint current surging in his body. In the reception hall of the Blackthorn Security Company, Leonard had already shaken off his stiff state from earlier, and his expression didn't look abnormal as he talked about the recently discovered house that Lenevis rented before. "Is that so? He never told me about it before," Megos replied normally, creasing her eyebrows slightly. Max, who had been watching with bated breath the entire time, felt his heart skip a beat as there was finally a reaction from Megos as she raised her hand while her brows were still furrowed. Then, she grabbed her blonde hair, pulled out a handful, and casually threw it into the trash can by the side. Leonard was dumbfounded. He gulped with difficulty, and his palms were full of cold sweat once again. Klein walked up the stairs to the second floor with the blood vessel thief in his left hand. He looked at the door that led to the Nighthawk's break room, where Dunn Smith stood silently in his black windbreaker. Here, Dunn Smith had a rather emotional chat with Klein, explaining to him why it was that Dunn 8, the Beander characteristics of their fallen comrades, with it mainly having to do with him honoring their deaths and not letting the Beander characteristics of indestructibility turn their Beander characteristic and bodies into something horrifying. On the sofa in the receptionist area, Leonard watched Megos pull out clumps of her hair as his expression became more and more rigid. Megos seemed increasingly restless as she constantly picked up the glass for a mouthful of water. She looked at Leonard with a contorted expression. "I don't know why, but I suddenly feel a little unwell." Leonard Mitchell was about to reply when he suddenly saw Megos reach for her face. She clawed out a piece of flesh, a long piece of flesh stained with blood. "My face is a little itchy," Megos smiled, a little embarrassed. The edge of her lips spread to where her cheekbones were, revealing a row of white teeth and bright red gums. F***ck, Leonard cursed out silently. He felt that the situation was worsening way too quickly. His lips quivering, Leonard turned to listen as his expression immediately turned steely green. He forced a smile and apologized to Megos, who was clawing out pieces of her flesh. "I need to use the bathroom." "Ow, right." Megos's tone became ethereal. She rubbed her belly and said, "My child is a little restless." Leonard didn't reply. He hastened his footsteps and approached the partition. After entering the corridor, Leonard stared deeply at the box of ash in Dunn Smith's hands and exhaled in exasperation. Following that, his expression turned firm, Captain, I'm afraid that it's too late. We have to deal with Megos and her baby immediately, otherwise, the whole of Tingen will suffer terrible losses. This isn't something that can be avoided just by evacuating the citizens around us. I know that you've already sent such a telegram. Dunn knitted his eyebrows and asked, unusually stern, are you sure that the situation has worsened to such an extent? Yes. In no more than 3 minutes, Megos will undergo a mutation, and her child will descend upon us. Leonard said with a certain tone. At the same time, he glanced at the thick, large blood vessel wrapped around Klein's hand and said, sealed artifact 2-105. Let me use it, I can better utilize its abilities. All right. Klein didn't hesitate to hand the blood vessel thief over to Leonard. That was something he intended to do so from the beginning. At that moment, Dunn tugged at his collar and patted down his windbreaker. He spoke with a determined tone, I'll head out with St. Selena's ashes first. Come out after 10 seconds, remember, come out only after you finish counting to 10. Then, regardless of my condition, direct your strongest attacks at Megos and her baby without wasting any time. With that said, he turned around and walked towards the partition with the urn of ashes. Captain, Klein let out a shout, his lips dry. Captain, Leonard also shouted. Dunn stopped and looked back. He had a gentle expression as he said with his mellow voice, don't worry about me. I'm not alone. Adelaide, Dwayne, Hit, and Kenley are all fighting alongside me, no matter what kind of danger I face. He paused for a moment before speaking, his gray eyes gentle, there's no need to be too nervous as well. We're guarding Tingen City. His lips arched upwards, forming his usual smile. After saying those words, he didn't stay any longer. He stepped through the partition, his black windbreaker following behind him. Captain, Kissin and Leonard shouted at the same time, their tears falling uncontrollably, but Dunn didn't slow down. We are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against threats and madness. Cry of life. Beep Visor ****. The telegram set up in the captain's office suddenly came to life, seemingly having received a new telegram. But Klein and Leonard couldn't be distracted. They were counting the movements of the second hand on the clock as their red eyes welled up with tears. 10, 9, 8. Just then, Dunn Smith carried the silver, bone-like square box into the reception hall with a solemn expression. Megos, who was pulling out clump after clump of blonde hair, tore a wound that was deep enough to show her bones. It was as though she was triggered by something. She suddenly stood and pointed at Dunn Smith in his black windbreaker. She shrieked, you want to kill my child. You want to kill my child. Here he is, one of my favorite characters, perhaps, the only things you end up loving, are the things that cannot last forever. Perhaps the beauty of an end or tragedy is what makes humans more caring for the present they have with them. Perhaps Dunn Smith was just one of those really well-written characters. Max mused as his expression soured slightly. Boom. The shrill and terrifying voice reverberated. Klein felt like he was being struck in the head with a sledgehammer. He suddenly forgot to count as he had a headache and felt dizzy. His vision went red, and there seemed to be liquid flowing from the tip of his nose. He subconsciously looked sideways, and he saw the corner of Leonard Mitchell's eyes. The tip of his nose and the corners of his lips were covered in fresh blood. His face was extremely pale, and his body was wavering as though he was about to fall. I'm probably in the same state. Klein reined back his thoughts and continued to count in silence as he skipped 2 numbers. 5, 4. Struck by the terrifyingly sharp voice, Dunn Smith's deep gray eyes were filled with red veins. Every single strand was crystal clear. The blood vessels in his face protruded out as well, every one of them like a poisonous snake. There was also a gurgle as red liquid flowed out of his cars as well. Despite that, he did feel dizzy. Other than his right hand pausing, his strong willpower drove him to press down on St. Selena's urn and open the lid. Inside the box, there was deep darkness. In the darkness, there was fine resplendent sand. The scene was magically beautiful, just like a starry night being stored in a box. The surroundings suddenly became dark, and the darkness engulfed the entire reception hall. In the air, there were countless black, cold, and smooth threads floating. ***T. I can't see anything now. I forgot that this black sand basically covered everything. Will I have to go inside? Max asked silently. No, not yet. Wait for Dunn's demise. Once that happens, the ashes should return to normal. Although a few powerful figures know of us, they either can't, won't, or are not bothering with us for the moment. It is better to leave it like that. Directly interfering with this situation will not only bring his anger, but will also alert the normal official beyonders of us. We need to become strong enough before that happens. Samuel interrupted Max's line of thought. Unity could still not speak, but both Samuel and Max felt a slight hunger towards Megos' unborn child. They surged towards Megos and entangled her almost instantly. It wasn't like a spider web, but more like the tentacles of some unknown creature. Megos had already torn out her right eyeball. It hung by a thin cord of flesh underneath her eye socket. She stared at Dunn Smith with hatred as she roared, "You must die." Bang! Dunn was cast away by a formless force and slammed heavily into the wall opposite. The wall cracked, and bricks were thrown up. He spat a mouthful of fresh blood onto the ground, but both his hands were still tightly holding onto Saint Selena's urn. He held onto it for dear life and kept it from falling to the ground. Those countless black, cold, and smooth threads tightened and bound Megos firmly to the spot. No matter how much blight-tainted flames rose up suddenly, or how her skin began to secrete a liquid that smelled like brimstone, neither of those defenses dealt any damage to the threads holding onto her. 3. Klein and Leonard dashed out through the partition simultaneously. One of them was holding onto a warm thin gold slice, and the other had already aimed his 5 fingers with the blood vessel thief wound around his left wrist at Megos. Megos, who no longer looked human, struggled as flesh protruded from both sides of her shoulders. They were a mixture of blood vessels and green veins, round like a child's head. Above the 2 heads, cracks rapidly spread and seemingly turned into a pair of eyes. Megos suddenly noticed danger approaching, and she opened her mouth. The corner of her lips cracked all the way up to her cars. She was going to deal the blaspheme curse to every enemy that attempted to harm her child. At that moment, Leonard clenched his left hand into a fist as his wrist made a half-turn. His pale face turned livid, and the vessels protruded like a bunch of tiny poisonous worms. Megos' blaspheme curse was left stuck in her throat as it came to a sudden halt. She seemed to have lost the ability to speak and the ability to evoke curses. Klein seized the opportunity and muttered an ancient Hermes word in a deep voice. "Light, I want light, and there will be light." He suddenly felt the thin gold slice that was covered in mysterious patterns become boiling hot as he saw it emit a blinding light, as though it had become a miniature sun. Right on the heels of that, Klein injected more than half his spirituality into it and threw the flaring sun charm towards the restrained Megos. The reception hall instantly turned transparent as darkness and gloom vanished simultaneously. The black fine threads that entangled Megos shrank as though they were instinctively avoiding something. But before Megos obtained her freedom, she had already seen the sunlight. At some point in the fight, a hole had ruptured in the ceiling of the Blackthorn Security Company, and the hole went all the way to the rooftop of the 3rd floor. The bright blue sky and glaring sunlight shined through simultaneously. The thin gold slice combined with the sunlight above Megos' and immediately expanded in size. It went from a spherical light to a sphere with countless flames spiraling around it. Rumble! The entire building shook vigorously, and the glass windows on the nearby streets shattered. However, the power of the spherical light concentrated its might at its core, without dissipating much. It enveloped Megos, and the light was so glaring that Klein, Dunn, and Leonard couldn't open their eyes. Klein held back his tears and looked through squinted eyes. He saw that the light had dispersed, but the flames were still soaring. Among them, there were many black ashes dancing in the air. Megos and the baby in her stomach were nowhere to be seen. Just like the coffee table, water glass, newspaper, and sofa in the area. Is it over? Did we finish the son of an evil god before it descended upon this world, taking his mother out at the same time? Klein still couldn't believe it. His experience of playing video games told him that the final boss couldn't be taken care of so easily. Max could finally see as the dark sand had fallen to the ground. But Dunn was not dead, at least not yet, and neither had the fallen creator actually descended. But he saw the surprised and jubilant smile on Klein's face and smirked at his naivety. Suddenly, he felt goosebumps all over. His clown instincts told him that there was extreme danger approaching. Without thinking, Klein rolled to the left abruptly. Just then, a long arm with an extremely sharp white bone blade cleaved the spot, seemingly out of nowhere. The monstrosity had an abnormal beauty, and it floated in midair. It was unbelievably fast and almost impossible to dodge its attacks. Whoosh! Asterisk. Klein's clothing on the right side of his chest was ripped apart, his skin ruptured, and his flesh, along with his bones, was split into 2. The wound was so deep that he could almost see one of his lungs. If it wasn't because he sensed danger approaching beforehand and dodged in time, that slash would have sliced him in half. But, even so, Klein slowed down. Extreme pain filled his head and scattered his consciousness. At the end of the white bone blade, a figure rapidly flew out. If it wasn't for the bump on its stomach, perhaps no one could identify it as Megos. Her hair and dress had been burned entirely. The skin on her face and body was charred black and was peeling off, flake after flake. Her nose had melted, leaving only 2 small black holes behind. Her eyeballs were nowhere to be seen, and there were faint white flames dancing in the empty sockets. The 2 heads, that had popped up from both sides of Megos' shoulders had been burned away. Her left arm had become the white bone blade that she was holding. It looked demonic, yet holy. Creak. As the ground shook, Megos ignored Dunn and Leonard, as well as the black, cold, and smooth fine threads that were hurtling towards her again. She phased over to Klein, who had come to a stop after rolling away. She aimed the white bone blade at Klein's neck and was about to slash down. Suddenly, she heard a voice that contained a rich blasphemous tone. Submit. Leonard lifted his left hand and aimed his palm at Megos. The sealed artifact 2-105 wrapped around his wrist had turned from a thick pale, blood-tainted blood vessel into a crimson intestine that had expanded to the point that it looked ready to explode. With the aid of the blood vessel thief, Leonard had successfully stolen Megos' blaspheme curse and was attempting to use her power to seize control of her. Only an ability at her level was effective. Under the influence of the blaspheme curse, Megos bent her waist, and her knees were constantly trembling. Her motions came to a halt as the surrounding black threads surrounded her as though they had found delicious prey. Klein also took the opportunity to roll in the opposite direction, leaving a trail of fresh crimson blood behind him. However, he got some reprieve from his extreme pain and reached his hand into his pocket. He took out the last flaring sun charm. He took the opportunity when Megos was stationary to finish her off, once and for all. If she were to hold out until the baby was born, the outcome would be beyond their imagination. Boom! Megos' head exploded on its own. Her charred skin and flesh flew in all directions. But her headless body seized the opportunity to shake off the effect of the blaspheme curse. Boom! Megos' charred body transformed into a projectile that shot towards Leonard. Since the blaspheme curse had been forcefully disrupted, Leonard was temporarily frozen on the spot. At that moment, Dunn Smith was still holding onto Saint Selena's urn tightly. His face was abnormally pale, and the black, cold threads that were created were still short of surrounding Megos. Creak. Megos slammed into Leonard, throwing him to the wall. The wall collapsed from the impact. Leonard's bones cracked, and there was blood spewing out from his mouth incessantly. Without even having the urge to struggle, he fainted instantly. Megos raised her white bone blade, but the countless black threads that emanated from Saint Selena's urn enveloped her again and were about to bind her to the ground. Without the luxury of time to mind his injuries, Klein quickly took out the thin charm. Just as he was going to recite the ancient Hermes incantation, something suddenly sounded in the deep, dark, yet quiet room. Klein quickly took out the thin charm. Just as he was going to recite the ancient Hermes incantation, something suddenly sounded in the deep, dark, yet quiet room. Wah! It was the cry of a baby. I have realized nobody wants to actually read all this, so I am announcing that it will stop from chapter 76 onwards. Furthermore, I will release all chapters including chapter 76 in quick succession, preferably within 1 or 2 days. So yes, a mass release of chapters to get it over with and bring everyone back to the main plot. Sorry for disappointing everyone with these few chapters. Dunn and Mastermind. The baby in Megos' stomach cried. It squirmed, wanting to come into this world in a bid to help its mother escape from her predicament. The black, cold, and smooth threads appeared to suffer a shock as they seemed to be suppressed by an invisible power which led to their retreat backwards. Wah! Max on the outside of the security company heard the cry of the child, but he did not feel anything other than the strange hunger that Unity displayed for it. Perhaps it was due to the distance from the source, or perhaps it was because he was not the target. Dunn and Klein became dizzy at the same time. They felt their throats contract involuntarily as their contracting air passages instantly stifled them. Crimson liquid flowed from their nostrils, their eyes, and their ears. All of their capillaries seemed to have ruptured. If it wasn't for the fact that Klein had undergone the torture of hearing the mutterings and ravings every time he headed to the world above the gray fog, as well as Dunn holding onto the ashes of Saint Selena, they definitely would have fainted on the spot, just like Leonard Mitchell. Megos's headless body turned over and looked at Klein, who saw her charred skin and flesh peeling to the ground, and the holy, yet evil white bone blade. Having escaped its influence thanks to his rich experience, Klein immediately felt his scalp tingle and forgot about the pain in his right chest. He seemed to witness his enemy charge towards him maniacally, not giving him any time to recite the incantation, infuse spirituality, and throw out the flaring sun charm. Just as he was about to dodge the attack, Kissen saw Megos suddenly pause. He saw Dunn Smith's black windbreaker fluttering, and the captain diagonally across him had buried his head. There were multiple thick twitching objects on his back as if they were venomous snakes or tentacles or monsters. Dunn was using his abilities as a nightmare to forcefully impede Megos's movements. Bam bam bam. With a mere struggle from Megos, the thick tentacle-like objects that protruded from Dunn's back exploded at the same time. A large amount of blood splattered out, covering every corner of the room like rain. Dunn wasn't disappointed at the result, for the blood had been absorbed by the black threads created by Saint Selena's ashes. They had been absorbed. The countless cold, smooth, tentacle-like threads entered a frenzy. They swarmed forward and bound Megos tightly, wrapping themselves around her bulging, squirming stomach. An opportunity. Klein was as nervous as he was excited. He prepared to shout the ancient Hermes word for light. Wah, wah, wah. The cries of a baby could be heard once again, more frequent, and more incessant this time around. The countless black threads suddenly came to a pause, retreating and trembling again as if they had all been struck by lightning. Dunn's expression changed when he realized that Megos was about to free herself. Without hesitation, he retracted his right palm, formed a claw, and stabbed it into his own chest, his left chest. He quickly pulled out his right hand, his fingers holding a bloody heart tightly. It was a still beating heart that brought with it the sereneness of the night and a dream. Captain, Klein watched helplessly as Dunn Smith stuffed the heart into the urn containing Saint Selena's ashes. His vision quickly blurred. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Crying that sounded like a late-night nightmare resounded. The countless cold and serene threads once again resumed their efforts as they wrapped themselves tightly around Megos. This time, they didn't loosen their bindings despite the cries coming from the baby in Megos' stomach. In fact, they even sealed the terrifying sounds within the body. Klein's tears fell together with his blood. He uttered a simple Hermes term in a deep voice, light. The light that illuminates the darkness. The light that brings warmth. He infused almost all of his remaining spirituality into the thin gold piece etched with mysterious symbols, causing his mind to immediately turn blank and dizzy. Having mustered the last of his strength, Klein tossed out the flaring sun charm at Megos, who was still bound by the countless black threads. The black threads didn't retract this time, having not followed their instincts, as if they were being willed by someone. Thump thump. Dunn's fresh heart was still beating within the box containing Saint Selena's ashes. The sunlight once again shone in from the hole in the ceiling, shining through all 3 stories, right into the Blackthorn Security Company, as if it were a corporeal pillar. It was guided here by the flaring sun charm, and it was focused on Megos. The sunlight fused with the top of the headless monster, and then exploded like the sun. Rumble. In the burning white splendor, Klein closed his eyes. This last scene was etched deep into his mind. Megos' body lost its left arm, head, and multiple pieces of flesh. Its charred body crumbled instantly. The half-illusory, terrifying creature within her body no longer had the support of a physical body and couldn't complete the last stage of its transformation. It turned into a furious ball of black gas, dissolving amidst the light and flames. Rumble. The entire building shook violently, but this was only due to the released energy of the flaring sun charm. The charm was different from a normal bomb. Its powers were concentrated, yet restrained. Klein fought to stabilize his body. He opened his eyes and looked ahead a few seconds later. He saw that the walls had crumbled. He saw a charred circle where Megos once stood. Surprisingly, the floor had only melted slightly. He saw a burned, bloody placenta on the ground. He saw Dunn Smith standing on the spot, still wearing his black windbreaker. He saw the heart in the box of Saint Selena's ashes still beating slowly. He saw Leonard Mitchell lying on the opposite side. His outcome was unknown. The exhausted Klein felt elated and felt that he could still use ritualistic magic to save the captain. He felt that Megos and her baby were truly finished. No, it was more accurate to say that the latter had suffered an interruption and was exorcised. At that moment, Dunn Smith turned to look at Klein. His pale face had a warm and relaxed expression, and his voice was still as mellow as it usually was. "We saved Tingen." After saying this, it was as if he had returned to the time when he was 20. He no longer appeared stern and serious as he winked at Klein with his left eye. Klein's expression froze. He saw the heart in the box of St. Selena's ashes stop beating. It turned into a resplendent ball of light before scattering into the surroundings. He saw the captain fall backwards, his arms losing their strength. It felt like the scene was made up of a series of paintings, but Klein could do nothing to stop it. Thump! The box of St. Selena's ashes fell onto the ground, just like Klein's heart. Thud thud. Even though the box wasn't covered, the darkness within the box sealed the opening, preventing the resplendent sand-like ashes from falling out. The box rolled a distance away towards Kaelson. Dunn Smith fell to the wrecked floor, his deep gray eyes having lost all their luster. He was looking at the hole in the ceiling, the sunlight pouring down on his face. "Captain." Klein's vision blurred once again. He wanted to shout, but that word and the subsequent words were stuck in his throat. "We miss you too." At that moment, the box containing St. Selena's ashes had rolled to his feet. Suddenly, Klein felt a pain in his chest, his pupils violently constricted as he froze in place. He looked down to see a slightly pale palm, drenched in blood, coming out the left side of his chest. Megos isn't dead. No, a new enemy. The mastermind behind the scenes. Am I going to die? Klein quickly lost consciousness, his eyes almost losing focus. His body slumped to the side. His breathing gradually slowed and, he finally felt the palm pull back quickly. He saw a pair of brand new leather boots, and a hand reaching downward, a slightly pale hand. It grabbed the urn of St. Selena's ashes. Klein's vision went black, and he lost all consciousness. Max observed the scene vigilantly, and as soon as Klein closed his eyes and his body stopped breathing, he immediately took out a vial of liquid that was constantly changing colors and also randomly turning black or white. Without hesitation, he quickly drank it while staring at Klein's body, and then put away the vial that had been storing the liquid. He pulled out the Wanderer's key and immediately walked through a door he had long since prepared and placed right behind him. Closing the door, Max immediately placed the door on the other side at an angle and used his legs to break it in half. He opened the window in front of him and tossed out the two halves of the door from the moving train. Only after he was done with everything did he sigh in relief and slump to the ground. However, he soon felt the control over his body and mind weaken and realized that the potion was taking effect. Doing so in a moving train was not the best of ideas. He turned to Ademisal, Tom, and the three kids they had picked up. "The door. Summon the door from the primordial unity," he said while gritting his teeth and closing his eyes to enter the amalgamation of all, and answered the prayer and summoning done by Ademisal perfectly, and sent over the earth's door to him. Opening his eyes once more, he saw the door standing right above three candles, with slight evidence of his special chalk having been used, but the chalk lines themselves were missing, which was a feature of the ritual, sacrificing the chalk itself as the price of the ritual. "Send it back to him once I reach the other side. And Tom," he turned to the kid who had grown a bit taller, "take care of everyone." With a hat, he pulled out the Wanderer's key and walked through to Independence. The other side of the door led to a closet in his home, which was locked from the inside because he would store the Independence's door in the amalgamation of all every time he was here, and only needed a place to store it safely when he was on Earth. Burned and shattered objects were scattered around in the now destroyed Blackthorn Security Company, but there wasn't a single sound, it was just like a cemetery. A few minutes later, Leonard Mitchell's body moved, his eyes opening slowly. He propped himself up with difficulty and surveyed the surroundings. He saw Dunn Smith on the ground. He also saw Klein, who had his eyes staring wide as a look of shock was plastered across his face. Dunn and Klein both had visible wounds on the left sides of their chests. "No," Leonard squeezed out the word from his throat as he staggered towards Klein's corpse, which wasn't far away from Dunn. He kept checking them, going between the two repeatedly, but all he could do was accept this irreversible truth. Leonard's knees buckled as his knees plopped to the ground. His green eyes were filled with pain as tears streamed down his cheeks, washing away the blood and dust. He turned his head and listened for 2 seconds and suddenly sprawled forward. He let out an angry roar, clenched his palms into fists, and heavily pounded the floor. Thump thump thump. Leonard kept tearing up as he pounded the floor. Amidst his sorrow was a feeling of clear hatred and a clear sense of self-abhorrence. Thud thud thud. Leonard looked up when he heard the sounds of hurried footsteps and saw the members of the mandated Punishers and the machinery hivemind that had just arrived at the scene through his blurred vision. This is part of mass release. A few more are coming. Story of Tingen. Back on Independence, Max quickly unlocked the door of the cabin, and placed Independence's door on the circle he had prepared in advance, immediately sacrificing it to the amalgamation of all. His body was behaving rather similarly to when Unity had just fused with Samuel and Max, with random moments of stiffness and odd expressions forming on his face. He could feel his spirituality was in constant flux and his sanity was straining to remain focused. You need to get out of the village first. If anyone sees you, we will have to forego all work here. We will also lose all our anchors here. Samuel analyzed the situation seriously while Max struggled to retain control of his body and jump out of the window of the house, and escape the village by quickly running across the empty spaces behind the houses. Thankfully, it was currently night time and all the villagers were in their homes and asleep. However, even after exiting the village, Max did not stop running and continued into the distance until he could no longer run as he lost all control over his body. Boom! Max's fist, which had rapidly degenerated into blackish-gray tentacles, slammed into the ground. The weight of his hand had been increased exponentially on the way down, causing a visible crater in the soft soil, as the trees and plants in the area were blown away by the shockwave. The tentacles rapidly spread from his arm and covered his entire body within 2 seconds, causing him to lose all form and collapse onto the ground. At this moment, the spirit of Unity had grown incomprehensibly stronger within Max's mind due to the influence of the potion and its ingredients. But it did not move to try and devour Max and Samuel like the original beings of the other pathways. Instead, it just remained in its merged state with Samuel and Max, without actually doing anything. It is already united with us. There is no need to unite any further. Samuel guessed, and Max could only nod in slight confusion. They were perfectly fine here, despite the incredibly large size and power of Unity, solely because of the tens of anchors they had both in Independence and on Earth. They were holding together the souls of Max and Samuel, preventing them from being torn to shreds by the sheer size of the soul of Unity, just how a sun or black hole would tear apart and absorb anything smaller than itself that came too close to it. At this moment, the potion ingredients, which were originally only giving power to Unity, were pulled away from it and sent to Max and Samuel. The Fool's End Ritual, Max thought and Samuel could only nod as they saw Unity's size return to normal, and they were no longer pressured by its very existence. On the other hand, the power from the ingredients was split 3 ways in equal parts, under the influence of the ritual, and boosted the souls of all 3 parties present equally. The final result was Max and Samuel having the most powerful souls, closely followed by Unity. In a Tingen suburb, there was a house with a green lawn. The house had a garden that had begun to wither at the beginning of September. Attached to the house was a crimson chimney. There was a desk next to the window in the bedroom of that house. An ordinary notebook was spread open on the table. A slightly pale hand flipped the notebook to the very first page, then it quickly flipped to the back. As the paper flipped, the rows of words appeared faintly. Regents, a member from the Secret Order, sold the Antigonus family's notebook as an ordinary ancient book by accident due to the influence, both of weariness and illusions. It was a coincidence that made logical sense. Affected by the calling of the Antigonus family's bloodline, the notebook secretly affects its owners, one after the other. After repeated changes in ownership, it came to Tingen. It fell into the hands of the members of the Aurora Order, Sirius Arapis and Hannes Vincent. After they flipped through the content that temporarily appeared in the notebook and copied the corresponding potion formulas, Sirius and Hannes were worried that the Secret Order, who were good at divination, would track them down. After discussing it, they decided to avoid the risk by selling it to another person. They didn't wait for Mr. Z's reply, perhaps because he stayed at Enmat Harbor. Through Sirius's introduction, Hannes got to know Welch McGovern from Koya University's Department of History. Then, Hannes sold the Antigonus family's notebook to McGovern as an ordinary ancient book. Subsequently, Sirius was attracted by the treasure that was said to exist on the main peak of the Hornassus mountain range. He started to visit the Deweyville Library and research the mountain. He didn't think that there would be any problems, so he left his real address and name. That aligned with his personality. During this process, he acquainted himself with Lenevis, who was reading up on information about iron mines to set up a scam. Lenevis's hidden lunacy and swindling ability were well appreciated by Sirius. he decided to nurture him into a member of the Aurora Order. Of course, before that, an investigation was inevitable. Sirius covertly informed Lenevis about the evil ritual of praying to the true creator to deliver his spawn into this world. But he knew that the possibility of Lenevis succeeding was very low, because the difficulty level of the ritual was very high, and the requirements were very harsh. However, the latter expressed his strong interest in the matter, tempted by the possibility of obtaining a deity's approval. He planned to complete the ritual simultaneously as he carried out the plans of establishing his steelworks company. The cunning Lenevis could tell that there was something fishy about Sirius Arapis. But for his personal goal, he didn't expose him. He visited Hood Eugen in the asylum once again. They had known each other long ago, and they knew about their respective situations. After a dark divination, the Antigonus family's notebook was awakened fully. Welch and his classmate died. The lucky survivor, Klein Moretti, sent it to Ray Bieber's house under the influence of the notebook. It was a destined ending. Many rows were scribbled off and new content followed. For some baffling reason, and a lack of sufficient explanations, Klein didn't commit suicide after that and somehow managed to stay alive. In the Nighthawks investigation of Welch's case that followed, he met Dunsmith and joined the Nighthawks. Although it had already exceeded in Zangwill's description, it didn't affect the development of the story. Bacchus and his brothers were down on their luck. They lost their last chip at the gambling tables and were drowning in debt. In a bid to obtain money, they decided to kidnap and blackmail the somewhat wealthy individuals. When they were looking for their final hideout, they chanced upon the room opposite Ray Bieber's apartment. By then, Ray Bieber was already seduced by the power offered by the Antigonus family's notebook. He hoped to digest the gift left behind by his ancestors. However, he was in a semi-insane state, and he couldn't make the best and safest choice. He abandoned his dead mother, but he continued remaining in Tingen City. He only found a more elusive spot to carry out his digestion ritual. It was truly pathetic. If he had been slightly smarter, the story could have become even more complicated, but his decision was made based on his instincts and his poor state of mind. Bacchus and company purchased weapons and took the youngest son, Elliot, of the tobacco merchant, Vicroy, and held him for ransom. Finally, they successfully carried out the abduction and took Elliot back to the apartment opposite Ray Bieber's. Vicroy's butler was entrusted with looking for help from a security company. Because of Welch's mysterious death, security companies were short on hands. Klein chanced upon a deliveryman and happened to discover the existence of the Blackthorn Security Company. Leonard Mitchell and Klein accepted the job. Relying on their Beander powers, they quickly saved the merchant's son. Regrettably, Klein didn't immediately realize that clues to the Antigonus family's notebook were in the apartment opposite them. However, his spirituality reminded him in his dream. As such, the Tingen Nighthawks discovered corresponding clues. Sealed artifact 2049 arrived in Tingen. With the aid of the Antigonus family's puppet, Dunsmith led the Nighthawks to find Ray Bieber before interrupting his digestion procedure. Ray Bieber became a monster, and the situation was out of control. In the end, the Nighthawks skillfully worked together and took care of Monster Bieber, but they immediately faced the attack of a member of the Secret Order. More rows were scribbled away again, and the original content was impossible to read. Leonard Mitchell, who possesses a secret, was going to end the situation. Before he could, Klein, who was supposed to be doomed, killed the Sequence 7 member of the Secret Order in an inexplicable manner. That didn't affect the development of the story. Dunsmith got in touch with the Antigonus family's notebook and flipped through its content. From that point onwards, he was secretly tainted. Having finished with all his preparations, Lenevis beguiled Hood Eugen and used him to assist in his ritual. They tricked Lenevis's fiancée, Megos, into becoming the vessel that would carry the true creator's spawn. Lansfus had almost no possibility of success. The most serious problem was that even though Megos would be protected by the ritual's power, she wouldn't be able to withstand sexual intercourse with the illusory projection of a deity. It would cost her her life on the altar. At that moment, the kind Ince Zangwill helped Lenevis in Scarret. He split off half a pitche of a descendant of Death's characteristic that he obtained and planted it into Megos's body ahead of time. Hood Eugen made Megos enter a semi-unconscious state and convinced her that the true creator's illusory projection was Lenevis. Nourished by the accumulated resentment, gloominess, and oppression of the factory district, the ritual succeeded. Megos was pregnant with the true creator's spawn. The deity saw through the coincidences, but since he wished to break through the shackles placed on him by the 7 deities, he didn't refuse. Hood Eugen was contaminated. After the ritual succeeded, the mad Lenevis regained his rationality. He clearly knew that if the deity's spawn was to descend into the world, Lenevis, himself, would become one of the sacrificial offerings. How could a mortal be the father of a deity's son? This was blasphemy of the highest order. Lenevis decided to leave Tingen ahead of time and left clues to the Nighthawks, the mandated punishers, and the machinery hive-mind so that they could resolve the repercussions of his actions. There was ultimately a price needed for lunacy. However, Lenevis didn't write the letter directly to the Beander squads. He thought it would make him look stupid. He decided to leave the letter in one of the houses that he rented. He pretended to be playing a game with the Beyonders from official bodies. As such, he didn't bring up Hood Eugen's contamination and brought with him everything that he had obtained. Just in case, he informed Sirius Arapis in the safest way he could. The latter didn't quite believe him, but he could faintly feel the possibility of success. Selena Wood accidentally chanced upon the real magic mirror divination incantation from her mysticism teacher, Hannes Vincent. Her bold attempt was interrupted by Klein Moretti by coincidence. The latter successfully resolved this supernatural incident that might have caused serious casualties. The Nighthawks then investigated Hannes Vincent, who had recently been awarded. Therefore, Dunn Smith coincidentally saw a clear image of the true creator in his dream and suffered severe injuries. However, he wasn't contaminated because of what happened. That would have been noticed by the upper echelons of the Nighthawks. The injury made Dunn Smith's contamination by the Antigonus family notebook worsen. His absent-mindedness and forgetfulness worsened, and he was getting closer and closer to satisfying Ince Zangwill's requirements. Many rows were scribbled away again. Scriously unbelievable. Klein Moretti noticed Ince Zangwill's secret influence and saw the Crimson Chimney. This is because he was reminded by the teacher from the Koya University's Department of History, Azak, and The writing near the end of this line had turned incomprehensible, like the scribbling of a child who had his hands tied behind his back. He possesses many secrets, but even so, it's astounding enough for Klein to discover actual clues. It's unexplainable. Regardless of the reason, Ince Zangwill continued to act, and the story continues. Klein coincidentally ran into Sirius at the library and had no choice but to kill him. Hence, the clues leading to Lenevis were abruptly severed, and the discovery of the problem was delayed. Klein met Megos, but his spirituality stopped him from observing her closely. However, he didn't notice the subtle abnormality. That is logical. Our stories aren't made up randomly. He searched for the red chimney, but he always opted for a route that didn't include his target. Maybe in another 2 or 3 months, when he was on the last batch, he would find the real red chimney house. Rows and rows of writings were scribbled away, more than all of the previous rows added together. Dunn Smith's problem was alleviated. His condition obviously became better. He actually mastered the acting method. This was taught to him by Klein Moretti, who found inspiration from Daily Simone and Old Neil's example. No, Ince Zangwill didn't believe that, but he could only change his original plans slightly. New elements in the story came into play. Azak decided to go to Backland in search of his lost memories. It wasn't long until Klein and Dunn found clues from Hood Eugen. In order to ensure that Tingen City's Conservative Party and New Party would be in complete opposition, Madame Sharon, who wanted to vent the accumulated madness after her transformation, decided to take the risk and murder Member of Parliament John Maynard. Her motive wasn't strong enough, but she took action anyway. There are always times when people are not clear-minded enough, and she happened to be in that stage. Besides, she was confident that she wouldn't be discovered. Maynard's wife founded the Blackthorn Security Company through the tobacco merchant, Vicroy. They didn't disappoint her, and they quickly found Madame Sharon's abnormality. Dunn Smith, who possessed power that was close to Sequence 6, decided to take action first. He passed the sealed artifact 30271 to Kenley. When the two of them and Klein returned to Madame Sharon's residence, Dunn attempted to pull her into a dream to control her from a distance. It was a good plan, but, unfortunately, Madame Sharon happened to have the statue of the primordial demoness by her side. Hence, the Nighthawks' plan failed. Kenley reflected himself in the mirror due to his nervousness and saw himself. Madame Sharon was taken care of while Kenley died. Dunn blamed himself and consumed Kenley's Beander characteristic as he usually did. His digestion procedure was interrupted as a result and was delayed. As such, his mental state became unstable. Under the circumstances, Leonard and Klein noticed the letter left behind by Lenevis. Megos received a baffling summoning and arrived at Zudaland Street. She entered the Blackthorn Security Company, and the baby in her stomach was at a critical point in its development. It couldn't stop her urges. Outside the Blackthorn Security Company, a meeting between the Angel of Imagination, Ad. The feathered quill had abruptly been lifted when it had reached this point, and if Max had been here, he would have been laughing his A*S off at the terrified expression of the already pale Zangwill holding the pen with trembling hands. He placed the feathered quill back into the book, scratched out the name and let the pen continue. Between the Angle of Imagination, and MMMMMM. The quill was once again failing to write the name of the one who was having a meeting with him. However, Zangwill had only seen this once, and his face was more terrified than before as he could feel the crimson moon in the sky, as well as another equally powerful force restraining the pen. So, he has met him, and it is all right outside the space I need to be at. Had been Ince's thoughts when the notes had been written. Dunn made a detailed plan, a plan that was right, but he made one mistake. If he steeled his resolve to Megos behind Channy's gate, he would have stood a chance with the aid of the environment and the items present. If he wanted to wait for backup, he definitely shouldn't have just taken Saint Selena's urn out. Unfortunately, Dunn's mind wasn't in the right place due to recent events, and he didn't think of the most critical point. A deity's son would be able to feel the threat of the saint's urn. Hence, it was triggered and started to absorb its mother's strength in a bid to be born ahead of time, even though it wasn't exactly ready. Azek was in Backland, but he wasn't a traveler, so he couldn't rush back on such short notice. A few rows were scribbled away. Megos became a monster, and the fight began. With the aid of the saint's urn, blood vessel thief, and 2 high-level charms that strangely appeared. Megos died and the deity's son was exorcised. Dunn Smith died as a result, and the power of Saint Selena's ashes was severely damaged as well. That went perfectly with Zangwill's intentions. Zangwill didn't get a chance to showcase himself, but it didn't hinder him from achieving his goal. He killed Klein Moretti, the fellow who kept disrupting his plans, and he took away Saint Selena's ashes. Zangwill set up a ritual with the remaining half of the characteristics of Death's descendant. He consumed Saint Selena's ashes and successfully advanced from Sequence 5 of the Death Sequence Pathway, Gatekeeper, to Sequence 4 of the Evernight Sequence Pathway, Nightwatcher. As such, he received godhood characteristics and became a demigod. The sun continues to shine brilliantly on the land. Nearly no one in Tingen City realized how they narrowly escaped a huge disaster. Half-monster Ademisol, the notes had stopped here abruptly. This time the Crimson Moon had not acted, and thus the quill had been able to write down the name, but the other mysterious force had stopped it from actually making any difference to the life of the one involved. So, he is related to the child. Zangwill thought as he flipped to the last page. Zangwill, a middle-aged man that was holding onto the book, had dark blonde hair, a dark blue eye that was nearly black, a tall nose, and tightly pursed lips. His facial features were like that of a statue and didn't have a single wrinkle. He held a classic quill with his slightly pale hand and wrote a line clearly without dipping into any ink. He ended with a simple sentence. Tingen's story ends here. The papers rustled as he closed the book, leaving only a brown leather cover. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.